Глянувши востаннє на цей світ біленький, у смертну годину козак мовив так: хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Як вороги кляті нас на кіл саджали, як живцем палили, у смолі пекли. Козаки у хата життя не благали, про долю країни думи їх були. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки, нехай згинуть воріженьки на вічні віки. Хай живе, живе вільна Україна, хай живуть, живуть вічно козаки, хай цвіте червона калина, нехай згинуть
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптям посорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Зі сходу припхались до нас барани, для восстановлення великої страни, найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи, всяке озброєння, різне, ракети, потужні машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, і ми зачаїли на орків образу, з бандитів російських робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, на вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто ж винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає їх цар.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer and Enforcer Matt.
Good evening, everybody.
And tonight we're going to be going over the day 78 news of the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Of course, today has had massive successes near the Kharkiv region that was noted yesterday, and we can now see that the gears have been set in motion and the Russian line is collapsing within that area and will most likely fall within the next 2 weeks. We're going to get to that news, of course, later on tonight, but I do want to share the good news with y'all right away. So, with that, let's get into tonight's schedule. Starting off, we will not be covering the Kyiv news. That is, of course, the address from President Zelenskyy, which will be covered at the very end of the stream. We'll actually be starting off in Chernihiv and covering the news there. We'll then move down to the location unknowns, and we'll then cover the location unknown news. We've actually had a very high amount of location unknowns today, around 17 of them, so it's going to be the biggest segment of the stream. After we cover the location unknowns and the Chernihiv news, we're then going to transition to the Kharkiv area. But in between our transition, we're going to answer 3 questions from the live chat, super chats or live chats. And then after that, we're going to move on to the Kharkiv news, the Donbas news, and then we're going to pause once again, heading towards Mariupol, and answer 3 questions from the chat once more. We'll then cover the Mariupol news. Then we'll head towards Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and Kremenchuk. There's been a lot of news that's unfolded near the Dnieper River area today, so we will be looking at that and seeing what it is showing. And then finally, we'll be covering our international news, which there's a very small amount of today. And then we'll round out tonight's stream with an address from the legend himself, President Zelenskyy. So, without further ado, let's get to the first bit of news that we've gotten today, and it is a bizarre piece of news. Nothing can top this. Here we can see a man recounting the story of his own execution. This video right here is a Ukrainian man who got shot in the head, and he actually survived due to the bullet being so poorly aimed and shot at him. So he actually suffered a pretty much like grazing shot. It didn't really do too much damage to even his face as a whole. He actually looks just fine. But sadly, his brother was killed. But I'm going to let y'all see the story. And this is a first-hand account. You can't even lie about it because you can see a little bit of the scar of the bullet that once passed straight through his mouth and out the rear side of his jaw. And so you can't really make this stuff up. The Russians were actually going around in the occupied areas and executing civilians at will. So with that, here's the video. I'm going to let it play. I think that the captions at the bottom may actually be cut off by the screen here on the stream. So I'm actually going to read it off as he talks. So I'm going to turn this down a little bit and just read it to y'all and let y'all hear what he has to say. Slam, and then the blood flowed through my body. Here's the entrance. He's pointing at it right there. And here is the exit. You can see a small divot at the back of his skull where the bullet once exited. Mykola tells about his own shooting. For 2 of his brothers, and for him, Russians dug a grave. All 3 had their hands and feet bound, their eyes bound, and had been shot. They had been thrown into the ground. Mykola survived and was able to get out. And then he's saying, I pushed Dima out myself, I got out, and Dima fell in my place. On March 18th, Russians searched the brother's house. They found the uniform of Ukrainian armed forces of the younger brother and grandfather's medals. This was the reason of future torture and execution. Then he says he comes to the threshold, throws his bag, and asks, who served? Eugene said, me, here. Eugene was taken outside, put on his knees, and beaten with a bat, which he made himself. Their sister, Irina, oh, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, lived with the brothers when their brothers were captured. She was in a neighbor's house. She recounts, although I was told no, I still didn't believe it. Until I see, I still will not believe. The boys were blindfolded, thrown into a military vehicle, and taken out of the village. Irina says, you remember such a grid? Mykola says, well, yes. Irina says, that's what it is. Mykola remembers the Russians led him with his brothers blindfolded into the room. Later it became clear that people were taken for interrogation. In the village of Vishneve, on the territory of Sawmill. Oh, okay, I see what they're saying. I was here and the brothers were over the wall, so together. And so there was a line of the pallets, wounded soldiers were lying there. Mykola's sister had been coming, wait a minute, let me make sure I get that correct real quick. Mikola's sister has been coming to this place many times. She searched for my brother's things with no luck. But this time she found the same homemade Eugene's bat, but already broken. That's what it is. Irony, seriously? Yes, the handle is that one, 100%. And so they actually found the, right here in this clip, the bat of the brother who got beat with it, who the Russians took outside of the house and pretty much tortured by beating him senseless with the bat that he made with his own hands. So now Irina says, I said, and the flashlight? Well, look. The brothers were kept in this room for 3 days, then they took them to be shot. Here's the older brother, a little further is the younger brother. And he was at first shot and thrown into a pit, and then Dima was shot, but not thrown. And then when they shot at me, they did that to me. They pushed me and I fell, and my older brother was thrown on top of me. Despite his bound hands and feet, Mikola got out of the grave and walked to the nearest village and passed the Russian checkpoint. I saw that he was beaten, blue, and all on the ground. I invited him to the house. He washed, had breakfast, and I gave him some food on the way. We always hug when we meet. Mikola, let me make sure I pronounce this name correctly. Mikola Kolivshenko also reached his village 40 kilometers on foot. Doctors examined him after deoccupation. Found 2 broken ribs. The bullet went through the cheek on takeoff and did not affect vital organs. So, while the video has a bit of a happy ending in a way, with the man in particular who's recounting his story not dying, both of his brothers were killed and thrown into those pits you saw on video by the Russians. So, I guess that's about the best evidence you could ever have of a war crime being committed by the Russians, is that one of the people they actually tried to kill survived and now recounts the story of how both of his brothers were killed, and his sister most likely would have been killed as well if she wasn't in a neighbor's house. So, I guess you could say that the Russians really deserve to be put on war crime trials if they're captured, and a lot of these Russian soldiers are not high-ranking at all. You can tell that by the recounting of that story. Obviously, this wasn't a gang of lieutenants and majors that were gathering around shooting these brothers. These were just normal Russian soldiers, the privates and such that are in the Russian military. So, I think that there should be a massive search and massive identification program for all of these Russians who have been committing these crimes, so that way they can be held accountable when this war ends. Because what they did to that guy and his brothers is sick, and to think that they threw him in the grave and then his dead brother on top of them is just morbid and sickening to think about. With that, we're now going to move further down to the location unknowns. We've actually had a high amount of them today, which is somewhat unusual, and I do believe that it's suggesting that there has been a lot of stagnant action today, and so nothing's actually been put to a specific place, I guess you could say. Starting off with the first bit of location unknown news, we can see the Ukrainians equipping a DJI Mavic drone with bomblets. And of course, we'll have to mute the video because it does have copyrighted music. But here we can see the soldier holding the Mavic. We can now see them creating the bomblet and also writing an inscription on it. We can now see them mounting the bomblets onto the Mavic drone and then dropping them on Russian units. It looks like they're being used, of course, like we've seen over the past 78 days, they're being used to great effect. We can see that that bomblet almost got a Russian soldier that was standing in the open, but it seems like he ran fast enough to get away from it. So with that, that is the end of the video. A very interesting video to see, and I actually had thought for a decent while that the drones were going to be larger than some kind of a Mavic, but we can actually see that they're using Mavics, which is something that we use in filming, so very interesting to note. And with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. A while ago, I actually talked about the M113s that were being sent by the United States to Ukraine, and I said that they're most likely not really going to be used in frontline service. The M113 is a little dated. It's much like an MTLB, and the role that it's kind of fulfilled in modern battle is non-existent really anymore. An armored personnel carrier that just has a thin sheet of metal on it with some kind of heavy machine gun mounted on top. Those kinds of vehicles just don't really make it far on the modern battlefield. But here we can see that those M113s did make it to Ukraine and that they are actually in use as of today. So here's the footage of that. Let me play that real quick for y'all. And I believe it does have copyright music. It does. So I'll have to mute that video and play it. And we can see the M113s just driving around. And so, a very interesting video. Of course, I will of course be waiting to see if the M113s are used effectively, although I do have my assumptions and kind of opinion on the M113 and its relevance in modern war. I may be wrong, so take it what I say about the M113 with a grain of salt. It may actually be used incredibly effectively. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see destroyed Russian tanks. The Ukrainians just keep on. And here in this clip, you can see that they've destroyed even more Russian tanks. And the Ukrainians have now pushed the Russians far enough back that they can actually get up to these burned, charred wrecks themselves. As we can see here, some kind of BMP-2. We can also see what appears to be another BMP-2. Actually, it looks like they're all BMP-2s. A wonderful catch. That was 10% of a battalion tactical group's armored personnel carriers that were destroyed in that one clip. And a battalion tactical group, once again, has 10 main battle tanks and 30 APCs. So if you see 3 destroyed APCs on the road, that means that 10% of a single BTG's armored personnel carrier force is burning in a single spot in one area of the field. So it's very important to note that, because it's telling you that that BTG has taken some considerable losses in just that one instant. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we see Ukrainian forces capture a BMP-2. This one seems to be much more intact than the last 3, who did appear to have some slight mileage, and they look to be slightly used. We can see that this one is in much better condition, and the Ukrainians will apparently be using it in the future, most likely. So here's the video.
Благодаря действиям умелым командира нашего подразделения, со вчерашнего дня 227-й батальон стал механизированным. Теперь эта Бэха будет служить нашему батальону, и МТЛБ, захваченный им, тоже будет служить нашему батальону. Так что теперь 227 механизированный батальон. Слава Украине! Героям слава!
So with that, we can see that the Ukrainians are, of course, having incredibly high morale, and you can't have low morale when you continuously are capturing Russian vehicles. That is something that the Russians aren't doing, and we'll simply get down to footage and evidence later on to show that that's not the case for them. But for the Ukrainians, they continue to capture Russian tanks, manage to destroy Russian flagships, and shoot down some Russian aircraft here and there, although that seems to be a little bit more rare as of late. But still, we're seeing that the Ukrainians have been met with incredible progress, and hopefully they can continue on to capture more Russian vehicles intact to replace some of their losses, which they've been taking very few of. With that, we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see that there has been a map made today of all of the active Russian SIM cards within Ukraine. This gives us a very good idea of where Russian soldiers are the most. As you can see, according to this map, there is a large buildup of Russian forces on the western side of the Dnieper River near Kryvyi Rih. That's one area on our map that we've not been able to adjust because we haven't gotten any video evidence, but I believe due to the fact that the SIM card map is showing that there's a decent amount of Russian presence and activity in that area, that change will have to be made because it's very clear now that there is a significant Russian force. We can also see that near the Kharkiv and Izium area, there is also another sizable force of Russians there, a very, very high concentration. And so that seems to show that the heaviest amount of fighting occurring in the country right now, at least in terms of the manpower that's being fielded, is somewhere up near the Kharkiv and Izium area, which is, of course, incredibly important to note because we know that that's where the Russians are being pushed back the most near Kharkiv, and we also know that's where the Russians are making absolutely no progress is in the Izium area. So the largest part of their I guess you could call it offensive force, is now tied up in unsuccessful attacks and also retreats in the Kharkiv and Izium area. So very important to note, and it is very interesting to see this map. I didn't actually know there would be one compiled like this, but now we have it. So very important information to know. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that a Ukrainian MLRS is on the move. This is actually one of the foreign-lended MLRSs called an RM-70 Vampire. This was provided by the Czech Republic, and we can see that this thing is moving.
Там крутые пацаны едут.
Very interesting video, and it's also incredibly interesting to see that the Ukrainians are starting to field a very high amount of foreign artillery pieces, at least on video. We know that at the beginning of the war, they were using mostly Russian artillery pieces, like Mista Bs, Smerches, Grads, such things like that. But now we're starting to see a lot more video evidence of M777s and such MLRSs like these, like the RM70. Sorry, I almost butchered that there. I believe, yes, it's the RM70. So very interesting to note, and hopefully we'll see American MLRSs on the field incredibly soon, because those have quite a range on them. And we'll once again cover that news if we see evidence of those MLRSs finally arriving. With that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a pair of Ukrainian Su-25s in flight. We've always heard time and time again, and I'm starting to think it may be a myth, that the Ukrainian Air Force has largely been destroyed to the point that they do not exist. And while we've seen them carrying out very few sorties, we are starting to see a decent amount of videos where the Ukrainians are actually flying a tandem group of aircraft, call it whatever you wish, but we've seen tandem groups of aircraft flying together, and that indicates to me that they may actually still have a sizable air force left. We know that on an attack at Snake Island around a week ago, we saw 2 Ukrainian Su-27s attack the island, so we know that they have 2 Su-27s. We've seen an Su-24 on film, so we know that they have one of those, and now today, we see that there are still 2 Ukrainian Su-25s that are in flying condition. So right now, we know of at least 5 Ukrainian aircraft that are still airworthy and are still fighting the good fight. So with that, here's the video of the Su-25s flying over this cameraman. Incredibly interesting to see, and I hope that the Ukrainian Air Force has not been destroyed to the point that we've been told here in the West, and I believe that may be a large amount of Russian propaganda at play, because I haven't really heard the Ukrainians say that their Air Force has been completely depleted. So while the Ukrainian Air Force and the Ukrainian government has been stating and begging for the West to deliver fighter aircraft to them, it appears that they still have a sizable Air Force left, at least a couple of them. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians decimated a Ural. And of course, logistical vehicles are some of the most important to destroy in the course of a war, and we can see the Ukrainians are mastering that concept perfectly, and they're destroying Ural 4320s at an impressive rate still, and we can see one of these on video. Of course, at this moment, we know that around 2,000 logistical vehicles have been destroyed over the course of this war, which is half of the logistics force of the entire Russian army. And so we know that the logistical side of things for the Russians is suffering greatly, as the provisions, I guess you could call them, that should be reaching Russian combat units are most likely not reaching them at the amount needed or desired.
Вот. Осталось, нахуй, вот только, блядь, брошки до ножки, нахуй. Все, что осталось от Урала, нахуй. Вот. Все, что могли собрать, нахуй. Вот. Вот такая вот хуйня малята, блядь. Дед по нас, привет. Любите, блядь. Еще минуточку внимания. Идет их снимаешь?
Да, все снимается.
Внимание, все, что осталось, блядь, от автомата Калашникова. Вот я его взял, в сумочку сложил, блядь. Вот он. Стрелять он теперь будет только с-под печки, блядь. Вот.
When you see an AK with a bent barrel, it looks like it's been rusted as well or has a large amount of mud on it.
Сейчас что нахуй?
So, of course, an impressive capture by the Ukrainians. I believe with a little bit of armor all and spackling, that Euro 43 Trini will be running incredibly soon. So with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. Here we can see a new Ukrainian tank lended by the Russians. It's good to see that the Russians are supporting the Ukrainians' war effort against the Russian Federation, as they've been constantly giving the Ukrainians brand new tanks throughout the course of this war. So with that, let's take a look at this brand new T-72B3 that has been graciously provided by the Russian armed forces.
Трофейний російський танк Т-72 в нормальному робочому стані, вже трохи перефарбований і навіть з українськими тризубами буде воювати на стороні добра.
And as we can see right here at the end of the video, you can see the trident that's been painted on the tank. And it looks like they've tried to give it a very hastily made Ukrainian paint scheme. The Ukrainian tank, well, the Ukrainian military's camouflage scheme is much more different than the Russians. It's trying to go towards a more digital style route. And so it's very distinctive when compared to the standard Russian green that we see on most tanks. So I believe that this one will definitely not be misidentified by the Ukrainian forces as a Russian tank. And hopefully it'll have an incredibly long and successful career in the hands of the Ukrainians instead of the Russians. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we've seen a Russian Tu-141 drone crash somewhere in Ukraine. Now, a lot of people may be saying, now, Enforcer, this drone is not used by the Russians anymore, it's used by the Ukrainians. And I would believe that. But the thing is that it has red stars on the wings. And you see the Ukrainians, of course, would have changed that livery scheme to have the Ukrainian roundel on it, which is yellow and blue, much like the Ukrainian flag, yet this doesn't have that change. And so this Tu-141 has crashed somewhere in Ukraine, and it is a Russian one, which tells us that the Russians may be bringing those back into service due to a lack of surveillance and reconnaissance units, or reconnaissance technology. So here's the video.
Я сфоткаю нас.
Ну, мне для документации.
А я просто.
Ебать, сука, дура нахуй. Ого, блядь. Такая хуйня, малята.
And as you can see right there at the end, there was the red star, and it also has that blue outline on it, which lets you know that it's a brand new Russian roundel. This isn't an old Soviet era drone. This is, in fact, has had a livery repaint, because the Russian star, the red star, actually changed after the fall of the Soviet Union. It actually had a small little blue outline added on with the white outline. So that's how you can tell that red stars are new in the Russian army, is if they have that blue little outline on them, and this one does. So that lets you know that the Russians apparently put this Tu-141 reconnaissance drone back in the service, and then it crashed within Ukrainian territory. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see brimstones being launched from some kind of civilian truck. It's an incredibly interesting improvisation, and it's very interesting to watch these brimstones launch, because they actually don't take off in a uniform path like an MLRS would fire. These take off and they all start taking their own paths, which was really interesting. Honestly, it looked like doves being let out of the side of a truck at a funeral, and I guess that wherever these are heading, they might as well be having a funeral service for the Russians already. So with that, here's the video. You can now see the brimstones being fired, and you can see how they're all taking slightly different paths, kind of like pigeons or doves being let out of the side of a truck. Very interesting, and I hope that they did hit their targets. Of course, the British provided the brimstone missiles to the Ukrainians a decent while ago, at least officially, and now we're finally seeing evidence of their use. Hopefully they are being used effectively. These are apparently the ground-fired variants of the brimstone. There's actually an air-to-ground and I believe a ground-to-ground version of the brimstones. So hopefully these are being used effectively and have a high rate of accuracy. With that, we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see that a Ukrainian tractor captured an MLRS loader. Of course, I have to mute this because it does have copyrighted music in it. I'm sorry about that, but we can see here, this is actually a pretty nice Ukrainian tractor, I have to say. And we can see that it's carrying an MLRS loader with it. Once again, wonderful to see, and I believe that the Russian MLRS loading vehicles are specifically designed, of course, for their job. As the name suggests, they are a TOS reloader, and so I believe that those are probably in an incredibly small amount. And so a loss of those is irreplaceable in a way and is damaging their supply capabilities, specifically to their TOS artillery, to a large degree. I don't think they had to worry about that too long, because if I skip forward to one I believe I saw, unfortunately it's later on down the line, actually in the Kharkiv front, so we're going to have to get to that in a bit, but it looks like they actually captured a TOS as well. So with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we see the Ukrainians launching a drone against the Russians. Of course, the Ukrainians have a soft spot for the artillery and the drones, and we can see that there's a reason why. They're used incredibly effectively. As we can see some Russian trucks, it looks like Ural 4320s, set up around some kind of supply depot, and we can now see the drone dropping a bomb onto it. We can now see the bomb hitting dead on into the logistics bay. And we now see the drone surveying the damage as the building begins to smolder and then promptly burn. As you can see, the plume is starting to build up in size and severity, and we can now see a large explosion ring out from that ammo depot, it seems, that shows that it has definitely been destroyed, and it most likely took the Ural 4320s, which were placed incredibly close to that storage building, with it. As you can see now at the end of this video, footage from this ammo stowage incredibly far away. It looks like somewhere out in the field in the countryside, as the pillar of smoke from that explosion begins to rise, and most likely the sound with it, letting the entire area know that the Russians have been bested again. So, of course, I don't know what this is, but that's a cute cat. I like the cat. But anyways, with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we can see Ukrainian soldiers duck under a tank. This was included in the Enforcer short clip today, and I said they were having fun because I did read the the Reddit caption. I have to agree, if you look at the faces of these soldiers, it actually looks like they're smiling a little bit and having a little bit of fun, but this is a training exercise that the Ukrainians have carried out, and I have seen on footage before. This is to try and make them not scared of the tank, and also mentally prepare them for, of course, the horrors of war in a way, by letting them pretty much be driven over by a tank and have the fear of being run over. Of course, it's a safe practice in the Ukrainian military, but still very harrowing nonetheless. Now it's turned into a slideshow, of course, as usual. But you can see that the tank continues to roll over all of the recruits. I'm not sure if the Russians do this. I believe that the Russians would not, because if a Russian conscript was put inside of a tank and told to drive over some infantry that were laying on the ground, he would probably kill every single one of them just because. So I don't know if the Russians do this, but it looks like the Ukrainians had a pretty fun time in training, having a tank drive over them. Kind of a wild bit of training, but still very interesting, and I'm sure it's a life experience they'll never forget. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown News, where we see you've got to be joking. And let me explain the context behind this, alright? Now, we saw a washing machine. Y'all aren't going to believe this. We saw a washing machine in a trench near Kharkiv that was captured by the Ukrainians. And the washing machine was Ukrainian-made and most likely looted from a house. And everyone was like, wow, that's crazy that they're lugging that around with them. You're not going to believe this. Get this, y'all. An Mi-24 was shot down today and burned to the ground. And when the Ukrainians went up to this burning helicopter to survey the damage, they found a washing machine in the wreckage. There's a washing machine, a Ukrainian washing machine in an Mi-24. Now, my question is, what in the world gave them the idea to put a Ukrainian washing machine inside of their helicopter? Was that the whole goal of this entire sortie that this helicopter was operating, was to loot a washing machine and then take it onto the helicopter and fly off? Apparently, that may have been their goal. I don't know why they would have been carrying around a washing machine otherwise. But it did cost the helicopter crew their lives, most likely, and so it looks like they didn't get the washing machine, to say the least. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a lunchtime for one Ukrainian soldier. And no, this isn't Mr. Lunchtime, this is just lunchtime for a Ukrainian. And I think you can hear Mr. Lunchtime in the background trying to escape through the defensive perimeter that the Ukrainians have set up, and guards trying to stop him on his way to get this little bit of food that he has not seen for quite some time. So here's the video. As you can hear, the Ukrainians are trying to stop Mr. Lunchtime as this soldier fervently cuts up his food to make sure that he can eat it before Mr. Lunchtime gets there and eats it for him. And with that, that is the end of that video. We're now going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news from today, where we can see an instant of silly string. A lot of anti-tank guided missiles are wire guided, which means that there is a wire actually attached to the missile, and as it flies through the air, the controller that launched the missile will actually give inputs to the missile to change its course of flight with the wire attached to it. So just kind of think of it as the cheap RC toys you would get as a kid, and how the wire would be attached from the controller to the little RC car. That's kind of the principle behind a wire-guided missile. We can see them actually trying to hit this radio tower with this wire-guided missile. They missed the tower, and then the wire snagged on the tower itself, and the missile just went tumbling to the ground pathetically, as they have completely missed the tower and lost the missile as well. So with that, here's the footage. And there you go. Look at that. That's so sad. They missed the tower. They just skimmed the top of it. And then the wire snagged. And now you can see the missile spinning out of control because the wire has now pretty much grabbed it and thrown off its course in flight. We're going to watch that one more time because it's hilarious. And that pretty much sums up the entire Russian operation in Ukraine right now. It's a hilarious failure. And with that, we've now reached the end of the location unknown news, and also a bit of the Northern Front news, although that front does not exist anymore. With that, we're now going to start moving on into the Kharkiv and Donbas region and cover the news there. But before we do, we're going to bring Matthew on to give us 3 questions from the chat. We're going to answer them and then return right back to the news and cover the Kharkiv front and the Donbas as well. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and good evening, everybody. It is Enforcer Matt. As always, if you have a question for the Enforcer, please tag @the Enforcer in your message, and we will put them in the spreadsheet and try to ask them before the stream ends tonight. So first up, we have a $28 donation from Monks Gaming Denmark, who says, "Hi Enforcers, how do you foresee the conclusion of this war? Is there any chance of Russian victory at this point, taking into consideration the stance of the combined Western allies?"
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I'm not sure if that is your first time supporting the channel, but of course it helps us out a lot. To answer your question, the chances of the Russians ever being able to turn this war around, and a lot of people are going to think I'm taking a propaganda stance here, but the chances of them ever turning this war around and gaining the upper hand again is impossible. We've seen over the course of this war, the situation continues to worsen for them, and so I just don't ever think there will be a time now where they can salvage their special military operation, which I'm calling a war. However, while I do have great hopes that the Ukrainians can actually win this war, that doesn't mean that everything is going to be honky-dory and the Ukrainians will get back Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. I actually think that that may be a stipulation of the peace agreement. The most logical peace agreement I'm seeing right now, and of course I'll lay out all the options, but I'm going to lay out the one I believe is most plausible right now, is that the Ukrainians will sign a peace treaty with the Russians that will pretty much be similar to a white peace like the Russians, the Soviets achieved with Finland in the Winter War of 1939, but the Ukrainians will have to cede Donetsk and Luhansk as independent countries and recognize their sovereignty, and also give up their claims to Crimea. I believe that that will most likely be the most plausible course of action at the end of this war in terms of a peace agreement, because while the Russians may lose. If they can still hold on to Donetsk and Luhansk and also Crimea, considering that Crimea is now considered Russian sovereign land, and the Ukrainians wouldn't have actually wiped out Donetsk and Luhansk in the first place for that to be part of the negotiation process, I think that would be the most plausible ending to this war. But still, it would signal a Ukrainian victory because the initial goal of the Russians invading Ukraine was to annex the country, most likely for a short while, and install a puppet government more suitable to their interests and make sure that Ukraine will remain a Russian-aligned country. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $22 donation from Abacus, who says, what is your view as future U.S. president on robots versus humans in modern warfare? Some U.S. drones delivered to Ukraine seem to be AI governed and able after human launching to search, recognize, and attack objects by themselves.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And as the future president of the United States, I'll have to say that I don't really believe that AI technology will make it to the point where it's like Skynet from Terminator. I don't think it'll ever make it there. However, we do see that AI and drones in general are starting to make a more pronounced signature on the battlefield these days, as they're being used much more effectively than in wars before. I would say, honestly, that Iraq and Afghanistan and the United States' tenures there during the wars that we were involved in for quite some while showed drone warfare at its infancy, and we actually thought back then that that was really impressive. Now we're seeing the Ukrainians use every variety of drone possible, from incredibly small handheld drones to larger drones like a Bayraktar. So I believe that while AI isn't going to be the most prevalent feature of modern war, I believe that modern war is starting to shift more towards automation and drone warfare instead of, say, the more hands-on soldiers on the ground, pilots and aircraft kind of war. I believe the aircraft at large will be taking a turn towards that direction as well, as pilots in fighter aircraft, well, multi-role aircraft these days, will most likely be phased out of service in exchange for drones. Although some roles still cannot be filled by drone aircraft alone, and that's why there are still a large amount of piloted fighter aircraft and multi-role aircraft being developed by countries around the world. So I hope that does answer the question in a way. And something interesting, I was thinking that, and this is going to sound crazy, but hear me out. Call of Duty may have actually predicted something in the future, because if you remember in Advanced Warfare, in the opening scene, which is the only Call of Duty I ever actually played rather than Call of Duty Ghosts and Modern Warfare 3, there was a large drone swarm flying around the streets of Seoul. And what I was thinking is that AI technology could be used like that in the future to field a large amount of drones in a cloud of sorts, or highly spaced out, so that way it's difficult, if not impossible, to destroy them all, and some of these suicide drones could make it to their target and explode. I could see that as actually a viable strategy, although it is a little bit more expensive than using a one-off drone. And that was something that I was thinking about the other day. I was like, wow, like that actually makes a little bit of logical sense now with how modern war has gone over the past 20 years in terms of drone warfare. But that's just my observation. Of course, take that one with a grain of salt. That is a video game, and of course, Call of Duty, and well, really every video game on Earth that's based around something with the military isn't exactly something you should be basing an analysis off of. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question. With that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to go to the Kharkiv and Donbas news.
And the last one of the segment goes to Orlos the Druid, who makes a comeback with a $20 donation and says coffee and donut money.
Hey, well, I thank you so much for the support, Orlos the Druid. We'll, of course, be getting a decent amount of coffee and a decent amount of donuts. We haven't had donuts in a good while, but of course, they're wonderful. So thank you once again for the support. And with that, that is the end of this question segment. If you do send in a super chat, do not fret. We will get to all of them before the end of the night. So with that, we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv news and the Donbas news. Starting off with the most important news that we've gotten today, we've seen that Ukrainian forces have liberated the village of Pitomink. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and we can see here in this video that they have clearly liberated the village. This means that the Ukrainians over the past day have covered 4 miles of ground and pushed the Russians back that far. That is much like the collapse of the front that we saw in the direction of Stary Saltiv, and this is telling me that the Russians are on the back foot, and they will most likely be pushed out of the country within the next week or two, considering that this much ground has been made by the Ukrainian forces. As we can see here, a montage of Ukrainian and Russian forces on film as the battle ensues during this clip. Also, to answer Yahweh's question, if you do send in a super chat, we get to every single super chat. So if you would like to send one in and support the channel, we will definitely answer that question. As we can see here, MTLBs are moving around. I believe that those were Russian MTLBs on film. We can now see that the video is cut to black, and we can now see what appears to be Ukrainian armored vehicles, a T-72 and a BMP of a sort, moving around a tree line. We can now see Ukrainian soldiers moving through the brush towards the village. One thing that's very interesting to me is that the woodlands of Ukraine look very similar to the woodlands of Alabama in terms of its biodiversity with the trees and such. Very interesting to me. But we are seeing a lot of shortages of the short leaf and long leaf pines that are, of course, incredibly famous here in Alabama. They're like the only tree here. We can now see a large amount of Ukrainian forces moving around the village. We can see some soldiers laying down in the middle of a small dirt path. We can now see them moving through a field. And we can now see, now this is cool, alright? We can actually see that the Ukrainians are using a large amount of Russian captures because this is a Tiger armored car from the Russian forces that's now been painted up in Ukrainian colors and is now being used by Ukrainian forces. And this is something we see in nearly every video, so you can tell now that the use of Russian vehicles by the Ukrainians is highly prevalent, and it's giving you an idea of how many Russian vehicles have been captured in total. Not just main battle tanks, but armored cars as well. We can now see a really beat up AK. It looks like it was missing all of the plastic furniture on it. If it was one of those kinds of AKs, it may have wood furniture. We can now see a destroyed stack of boxes, a destroyed KAMAZ. We can also see what appears to be a massive trash pile that the Russians made while trying to loot the village. Something interesting to note right there, because they actually are not just thieves in general, they're actually very picky thieves, it seems. We can now see the Russians also made themselves at home within this structure, which appears to be some kind of service building. We can now see Ukrainian operating a drone. It looks like some kind of DJI. And now we can see artillery raining down in the distance on Russian forces. It seems with a decent amount of success. We can now see a Ukrainian soldier talking on film. Now the video has been blurred out. Not exactly sure why. But now we can see a little puppy. That was sweet. That was wandering around with the Ukrainians. And we can now see them showing the carnage of the battle that's unfolded and the victory that they have now achieved. We can now see a Russian captured vehicle that the Ukrainians are scooting off with. It was an MTLB. And with that, that is the end of that video, showing a great success for the Ukrainians and a promising future in the Kharkiv front. As a matter of fact, the front lines have been pushed back so far from the ring road at Kharkiv, it's really hard to even say anymore a battle has occurred at Kharkiv, because while it's occurring in the Kharkiv Oblast, it's been pushed so far back from the city that it just doesn't really even seem like the battles are happening at Kharkiv anymore. They seem like they're happening on the Ukrainian frontier with Russia nearly, but still, an interesting video to see, showing massive progress, and hopefully we'll continue to see more in the coming days. The Ukrainians only have to cover another 10 miles to reach the Russian border, and that gives you an idea of how large the progress was today in that specific area. They have wiped out 33% of the Russians' ground holdings north of Kharkiv in this one area today. With that, we're now going to move on to the next clip of news, where we can see a police unit of the Russians was destroyed near the area today. They had rubber bullets, riot shields, and knee pads within the vehicles of this convoy, which gives them a very good idea that this was some kind of Russian police force.
Біля Харкова, в кількох кілометрах від міста. Цікаво, що от я зауважив одну деталь. Це насправді не військова техніка, а, можна сказати, поліцейська. Тобто це Росгвардія або Національна гвардія Росії. Ми знайшли тут достатньо багато таких цікавих речей, як гумові кулі, наколінники, щити розплавлені. Тобто люди, які їхали на цих автівках, вони їхали вгамовувати Харків, розганяти демонстрації в Харкові. Уявіть собі, яке враження вони мали взагалі про цю війну і про те, як на них в лапках чекають в українському місті Харкові. Ну і ще одна важлива деталь. Всі ці машини були знищені під час дуже близького бою. Українці зробили засідку і таким чином вони зупинили цю колону. Наскільки я знаю, жоден з російських розгвардійців звідси не втік. Ну і цікаво, що це Приволжське регіональне командування внутрішніх військ МВД Росії. І ще ми знайшли тут ознаки того, що ці люди, вони були з Удмуртії. Ці люди, які приїхали розганяти український Харків. Гумова куля 12-го калібру. Її планували застосовувати проти моїх земляків, проти харків'ян, проти мирних людей в мирному місті.
So at the end of that video, we can see that the Ukrainian press officer has unveiled that the Russians are actually using a police force very close to the front lines, close enough in proximity to be destroyed by Ukrainian infantry. Something interesting to me that is not being considered at this point is that the Russians may have taken so many casualties that rear echelon units like this police unit have now been pushed into frontline service. Because my question is, how did they get this close to the front line in the first place to be engaged by Ukrainian infantry and destroyed? And the only answer to that is that the Russians gave the order for this unit to now assume a frontline position, which may be telling us how bad the situation really is in this area for the Russians. If a police unit is being used in frontline service, that's giving a very grim outlook for the Russians in terms of how this front is unfolding. So hopefully that assessment is accurate and the Russians are desperately trying to slow the advance of the Ukrainians, which means that they are losing to a huge degree. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Kharkiv area, where we can actually see that a tractor got a toss as a treat. We saw earlier that a Ukrainian tractor was hauling away a toss reloader, and now we can see that not only did they get a toss reloader, they actually got a toss as well. So today they actually got the complete set. So with that, you can see the video here of the toss being dragged down the road by the Ukrainian tractor. Once again, another victory for Ukraine, as the feared toss system appears to not be feared much anymore, as a large amount of these have been captured and destroyed. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Kharkiv area, where we can actually see a picture of a drone attack control center where the Ukrainians are operating some drones. We can see here that they have a pretty nice flat screen TV and also a nice laptop computer. I gotta say, I like the setup, and of course, they're doing impressive work here, knocking out Russian vehicles with these drones and also calling in artillery based off of the information they're gathering from them. So I have to say, very interesting picture, and it is cool to see how the drone, I guess you could call them, control centers are set up and how where the Ukrainians are actually using these drones from. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Kharkiv area, where we've seen farmers with a plow howitzer, actually. This tractor does not have a plow. It looks like they're going to be plowing the seas this year with a 120mm non-AK howitzer that's been captured from the Russian forces by a Ukrainian farmer. As you can see, they're now hauling away their victory trophy for the harvest season. I don't think they'll be having any more trespassers on their farm fields in the future. With that, we're now going to move on to something that we covered the other day, and I believe that this also may be another large indicator that the Russian front north of Kharkiv and west of the Donets River is falling apart. As we can see here, 73 vehicles were counted to be completely destroyed at the bridge, that the pontoon bridge that the Russians constructed over the Donets River. In these pictures, we can actually see all of the vehicles marked and numbered in the sequence that they were destroyed. Here we can see numbers 46 through 60 destroyed in this one area alone near the bridge. When we move on to the next picture, we can actually see vehicles 35 through 52 destroyed in this video. And look at this. It's like the vehicles didn't even move during this entire engagement, with the artillery most likely. They were destroyed on the sides of the roads, in the tree lines, almost like they were sitting there resting. And we actually found out that based off of the number of vehicles that were destroyed, 1 or 2 BTGs may have been wiped out entirely in this one area near this pontoon bridge on the Donets River. Here we can actually see vehicles numbers 1 through 24. As you can see down here, they actually had a creative label for the cluster of vehicles that was destroyed right on the edge of the river. And it's giving you a great idea of how much equipment the Russians lost in one instance near this bridge. Now, this is a major blow to the Russians, considering that they only had a limited number of BTGs operating in Ukraine in the first place, and we can now see that 2 of them were wiped out in their entirety near this bridge. That's giving you a really good idea that there's just no way for them to rebound, honestly. We can once again see the cluster here. This is just another angle of some of the vehicles that were destroyed in the last pictures that were top down, and now you can see the side view of all of these vehicles that were destroyed. We're now going to move on to the last picture, where you can see that cluster in particular, where we actually got some identifications for these vehicles. We can actually see that this was not a BMD, as I said yesterday. This is a BTRD. This is a BMP. The rest of them are T-72s and BMPs. This one that's actually in the river is a BMK. So, of course, massive losses by the Russians, of course, in a simple bridge crossing, and that gives you an idea of how incompetent the Russians actually are, considering that 2 BTGs can be wiped out so effortlessly. With that, we're now going to move further down the front lines, and I am going to, of course, make a mention that there has been no action near Stary Saltiv or Pechnihi further down the Donets River. We have been waiting for news with bated breath of this area, and also the counterattack that was pushed near Paramoha and Ukrainka earlier on last week, but we have not gotten any news as of yet, but I do believe that there is most likely progress that will be made there in the near future, considering that Russian lines are collapsing in this entire area. We're now going to move down to the area of Izium today, where, of course, the front line has remained a stalemate. There have been pitched and bloody battles fought over Izium for the past 2 weeks nearly of this war, as massive offensives have been operated by the Russians trying to break through the Ukrainian lines and race towards the city of Slovyansk, cutting off tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers from their lines if that breakthrough was successful. As we can see, the Ukrainians have held off this attack once again today, but we can see that the Russians may be on the brink of making a breakthrough. The Russians have achieved a massive victory today. This is something that they've heralded across the entirety of their news networks for the course of the past 24 hours, and this is, of course, making me heavily concerned. The Russians, of course, when they get a victory, they love to talk about it, because they're very hard-pressed to find one these days. But in this clip right here, we can see that the Russians have managed to capture 1 Ukrainian truck. This is, of course, a great blow to the Ukrainian forces and a massive victory for the Russians, because they've achieved absolutely nothing over the past few weeks, and so this is the biggest thing that's happened for them in a very long time. As you can see, they're touting they're touting the truck that was captured and somewhat destroyed, and you can see that they're now touting some of the captured Ukrainian weapons as well. And I have to say, it's very pathetic when your country has to make a huge deal about 1 Ukrainian truck being captured, because there's literally so little going for you at the moment. So of course I was joking when I said there was a massive victory here. There was not, obviously, but still at the same time, it's crazy to me that the Russians are touting this 1 vehicle as a loss. We see the Ukrainians claiming literally 2 BTGs and 1 sitting as a victory, and meanwhile the Russians are relegated to calling a single captured truck a victory. With that, we're now going to move to the next bit of news near the Izium area, but we actually found that this is more closer to the less talked about village of Oskil, which is on the Oskil River. Here we can see that multiple amount of tanks were destroyed by Ukraine's 79th Brigade today on film. Of course, it has copyrighted music, so I will have to mute it, but here is the video of those vehicles being destroyed. As we can see, it looks like a BMP is trying to move down the road, also accompanied by another T-72, another T-72 behind that, and also it looks like a couple of armored personnel carriers around the way. We can already see that one of the Russian vehicles was hit and brewing up fervently in the forward and lower part of the screen. We can see the BMP slowly inching forward the burned wreckage of the first Russian vehicle, and we can also see a T-72 with what appears to be a plow or a mine clearing attachment to the front of the tank. Very interesting addition. With that is of course the end of the video, but we could see that a Russian tank was destroyed and was brewing up like no tomorrow. The Ukrainians will be cooking s'mores on that one incredibly soon, and will hopefully have a nice spare parts mill out of that vehicle. We're now going to move further on down the front towards the area of Severodonetsk, where at the village of Torskay today, we've seen the 92nd Brigade engaged in combat, and we actually have a compilation of the footage of that right here. So I'm going to let y'all see this. Of course, it has copyrighted music in it, so it is muted, but I will give a rundown of what's happening on film. First off, we can see a Ukrainian tank advancing down the road with a Ukrainian tank in front of it firing. We can now see another tank advancing near a burning wreckage of a tractor and a Russian vehicle as well. We can now see the Ukrainian tank firing into the tree line, most likely at Russian soldiers. We can now see an abandoned Russian T-72B3. Once again, in usual fashion, nothing brand new. We can now see the Ukrainians inspecting the vehicle. As you can see, Z's clearly marked across it. We can now see Ukrainian infantry engaged in a firefight with Russian forces in the distance, as they're now laying down machine gun fire from what appears to be a truck of some sort. Now we can see a Russian destroyed command post or some kind of logistical vehicle, and we can now see some of the vehicles burning heavily on the highway. We can now see some abandoned Russian equipment and arms, as the Ukrainians are now inspecting what appears to be a large supply cache that the Russians made in the area. Now the 92nd Brigade is now advancing through a village, and that was the end of the video. It's of course great to see that the 92nd Brigade has been met with a large amount of success, and just for y'all to know, Operator Starsky, who was on the stream not too long ago, his unit that he's actually attached to is in the Rubizhny area fighting for the city right now. So a very interesting bit of information, and I do of course wish Operator Starsky and his unit the best of luck in the defense of Rubizhny itself. With that, we can see Russian armor in operation in the city today, and hopefully being repulsed by Operator Starsky's unit. With that, here's the video. We can see that this is a T-72B3, well, I'm sorry, not T-72B3, a T-72B on film, a much older and more dated, upgraded version of the T-72 tank. Hopefully we'll see turrets fly, because that's really the only way the Russian space program lives on these days, is through the Russian tanks and the flight of their turrets. We actually found out that the record for a Russian tank turret flying vertically is 82 meters. Unfortunately, I won't be able to translate that into feet, but the general rule of thumb, at least as far as I know, is that 1 meter is around 3 feet. So a meter is very similar to a yard. So you can do the calculation for yourself, and you can see that apparently a Russian tank turret has flown 250 feet upwards into the air, which makes it better than most ST's rockets. With that, we're now going to move further down the front, past Severodonetsk, and into the Luhansk region in general, as today we've seen a Mista-S in operation by the Russian forces in the Donbas region. The Mista-S is, of course, the pride of the Russian SPG force. They love these things, and they have around 730 of them in service, according to the spreadsheets that they have. We can see here that they're coordinating the artillery fire. The information has now been relayed to the SPG itself, as the crew now loads the shell into the breach. We can now see the gunner adjusting the fire through the scope. We can now see them loading the propellant for the shell. The tank, well, the SPG then fires. And you can actually see an entire Mista-S battery operating in this one area. With that is the end of the video, and it's very interesting to see that the Russians are brazen enough to show a video of a Mista-S that is not burning yet. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of news from the Luhansk region, where we can see the Ukrainian artillery destroy a Mista-B. They were getting very close to destroying a Mista-S here, as the Mista-B is very similar to the cannon that is mounted inside of the Mista-S. But as you can see here, the Ukrainians will destroy this Mista-B towed artillery piece and the ammunition with it. Of course, I'm going to have to mute this because it does have copyrighted footage. We can see the Mista-B hiring at a very high angle. We can now see the crew running from the piece, all towards the building, with incredible speed, of course. The Russians are a very scared fighting force. We can now see the Ukrainians strike the artillery piece dead on, well, actually beside the artillery piece, destroying the ammunition first. We now see that a small fire is ensuing in the ammo boxes where the shells and propellant were most likely being held. We can see that the fire is getting out of control pretty quickly. We can now see another shell land near the artillery piece, getting incredibly close, but not dead on. We can now see more shells landing close to the villa that the Russians ran into. I actually have to say that's a very nice house, surprisingly, incredibly nice. And now we can see that they marked the house with an arrow that said death. I don't really know what that's suggesting, but I'll leave that up to y'all's imagination. With that, we could see that that artillery crew went running for the hills as their artillery piece did come under Ukrainian artillery fire. That artillery fire may have been an M777, which the Russians actually really have no defense against, as the M777's range with the laser-guided munitions it can use is actually farther than the Russian artillery pieces can fire at their maximum range. So that actually puts the M777 out of harm's way, and they don't really have to worry about counter-battery fire as much as other Ukrainian artillery pieces, which gives them a marked advantage on the battlefield. With that, we're now going to start moving further down the front line, where we can see near the area of Orlivka, a DPR and /LPR troops on film. This did occur in the Donbas, but we weren't exactly sure where, so this marker is inaccurate, but it is somewhere in the Donbas in general. With that, here's the film of these DPR/LPR soldiers in operation, and you're about to see that these guys are not the cream of the crop.
Народная милиция ЛНР продолжает освобождать.
Of course, we can see them all using shush helmets, which is, of course, a great step up for the Russians, considering that the last thing they were using was shakos from the 1800s.
Территории Луганской Народной Республики от укрофашистских захватчиков. Зачищается территория.
We can also see that some of the soldiers don't have bulletproof vests, and they apparently don't know how to wear helmets all too well either. Apparently they didn't get the hat wearing class, because this guy is actually covering the back of his head instead of the top of his head, which a helmet is supposed to cover. The actual purpose of a helmet is to protect yourself mostly from airburst shrapnel or shrapnel from artillery in general, and we can see that this guy is doing an incredibly poor job at that kind of principle. So I'm going to let the video continue.
Силами 2-й отдельной мотострелковой бригады Народной милиции ЛНР. Также проводится работа по выявлению и ликвидации диверсионных групп.
We can now, of course, see the DPR/LPR soldiers posing for the camera. As you can obviously tell, no one's in this building because the cameraman is literally standing where they're aiming. So, not really a good ruse right here, but still a very funny and entertaining video to watch because it's almost like watching a performance.
Противника и минно-взрывных ловушек, оставленных нацистами на территории промзоны. Наши бойцы готовы к любым неожиданностям, вплоть до прямого огневого контакта с противником.
We can now see them running around very gingerly. And now we can see them grab. And you can actually hear, alright, there's a difference in between piped in gunshot sounds and actual gunshot sounds. And y'all been here long enough to know that. Real gunshot sounds are very raucous sounding, very high pitched, and very abrupt on the camera audio. It maxes it out. And in this footage, it actually sounds like they edited in someone tapping their shoe onto a concrete floor as this guy is loading his RPG. We're actually going to go back to that and listen to it again.
Вперед! Оружие к бою!
As we can see, they're now just moving around, of course, posing for the camera and firing off into the distance. Now, you know they're faking a firefight here when everyone's just sitting out in the open, crouched down, and then this guy runs up and he says, "Огонь," which means fire, and then they all start firing like it's a firing squad or something. That lets you know that there's not a firefight going on, because if there was a firefight going on, you're not going to wait for the order to fire. This isn't the 1800s. Napoleon Bonaparte isn't around anymore. This is the modern war, and so this stuff is just staged as all get out. So I'm going to let the video continue. this guy. He's wearing a firefighting helmet. You can't make this stuff up, y'all. The firefighting helmet offers no protection whatsoever. That's for, like, large objects falling on top of you, you know, of course, in a fire. But that provides no ballistic protection whatsoever. And this goofball is wearing a firefighter's helmet. Now, you can't make that stuff up, y'all. So, let me know what y'all think in the chat about this man. Has he gotten his military lessons from some pseudoscience guy or something? Because firefighting helmet is an incredibly poor idea. Also, very interesting color of underwear to choose when in a combat zone. But anyways, we're gonna let the video. I'm not judging that, you know, because underwear is not supposed to be seen in the first place, but still, very interesting. We're gonna let the video continue. Alright, now we're going to pause this right here. And I'm going to say this. If I pulled up soldiers in the first Chechen war, these guys look just like them. Y'all want to bet that they do? Let's pull that up. First Chechen war. Images. Alright, so let me find the one I'm thinking about. Hang on, y'all. Hang on. Alright, so actually, it looks like they were giving out better helmets then. They were giving out Alton helmets instead of the Shush helmets. So actually, the DPR and LPR are worse equipped than the Russians going into a war just 2 or 3 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. That gives you all too well of an idea of how badly the DPR and LPR is actually equipped. Here's a decent picture of soldiers wearing Shush helmets, and you can see that even in the early 90s, the Russians still looked a little better equipped than their DPR and LPR counterparts in the modern day. That's not a good sign. With that, we're going to let the video continue. We see a mock explosion rock down from the camera.
Совершена операция по зачистке промзоны города Рубежного. Враг вынужден был отступить и оставил свои позиции.
What's interesting to me is that the man they're interviewing here looks like Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek, and on top of that, this is the only guy in the unit who has a large amount of Ratnik camouflage and Ratnik gear. Ratnik is the camouflage pattern of the modern Russian army, and this is the guy they chose to interview, probably because he's the one who has the closest thing to an actual set of modern Russian gear in their entire unit, and I believe that's probably the only reason why they're interviewing Patrick Stewart here. We'll discount Patrick Stewart. With that, we're going to let the video continue.
Подразделение потерь не понесло.
With that is the end of the mock video that the Russians put out, well, the DPR/LPR forces put out. We're now going to move further down to the front to Russian forces in Donetsk. Of course, this is a self-explanatory video. It's just showing Russian separatist forces in the area. So I'm going to let y'all see this, and it pretty much explains itself. As we can see, a pro-Russian force soldier is now trying to prepare an RPG-7 to fire. The cameraman, oh my god. The cameraman put himself in danger. His life in danger for sure. Look at this. This man's looking straight down the exhaust of an RPG. Now, if that thing was to accidentally fire, which I wouldn't put it past the Russians, this man's head would blow off. Backblast from any kind of shoulder-fired weapon is severe and can kill you. And this guy is standing right behind it. This is kind of the principle of never stand in front of a firearm, even when sitting on a table, which is something I do. And this guy just broke that rule with a actual rocket launcher. What a doofus.
Можешь пока на паузу нажать.
Да, хай будет, обрежешь потом. Открой пока калиточку.
Стой.
We now see them all standing around like this is a day on the range, and they're like giggling and laughing like, hey, we can finally fire an RPG. Isn't this cool or what?
Давай, я выхожу.
So now the guy gets out into the street. We once again see someone scurrying behind his back blast for a second. Well, you now see him hitting the... He almost hit the "This is America" pose right here. Right there. That's almost like the "This is America" pose. But we can see him strike a pose and clear his back blast because he knows his friends aren't smart enough to do that. And he finally fires the RPG. We can now see them all running to cover, and a little golden retriever, it seemed, running around. Hopefully they don't eat that thing, because we know the Russians eat dogs. That is not just some kind of, you know, attack against them. We've seen proof in the Bucha Hospital European area that they actually tack dogs up to wooden racks and cut them up and eat them, pretty much. So hopefully they don't eat that poor dog. But with that, you could see another mock video by the pro-Russian forces, because there was no firefight going on until they got out there on film. With that, that is the end of the news of the Donbas and Kharkiv area. We're now going to start moving on into the Mariupol news and the rest of the news from around the country and around the world, and also the address from President Zelenskyy. But before we do, we're once again going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to continue on with the news. And so, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and up next we have a $50 donation from Marcio Lopez, who says, any chance to give an update on the foreign warriors' last news? Keep up the good work.
Well, I thank you so much for the support. And to answer your question about the foreign fighters, we have been getting a little bit of updates here and there about them and their whereabouts. We actually found out from Operator Starsky that the Ukrainians were planning on creating a foreign legion, and that would have been soldiers from around the globe that would have been put into a single unit and then would have been sent to the front. They actually got so many volunteers that they ended up segregating these foreign volunteers based off of the country they came from. So there's actually an American Legion, a British Legion, a Canadian Legion, and so on. So we actually get the news piece by piece from all of these different nationalities and their fighting forces, but as of late, we haven't been getting a lot of news from them, although we do know that the American units, as well as the British and I believe Belarusian units, are actively engaged in fighting on the front lines right now, although I have not been able to find a lot of news for them personally to put on the stream. So unfortunately, I can't attest to their success right now, but as of the last time we were watching some information on them, it looks like they were still doing pretty well. At least Vasquez, a lot of people say Vasquez. Either way, I actually had a friend whose last name was Vasquez. He said Vasquez, so I'm just going to leave that at that. But we actually... know that they are doing incredibly well. Last we saw, they actually captured a couple of Russian trucks and a large amount of loot, and they actually destroyed some Russian tanks as well. So as far as last we heard, they were doing incredibly well. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Raphael Schneeves, who says, do you think America will send AH-64 to Ukraine? Reason why I'm asking is 2 AH-64s with APKWS-2 and Hellfires can destroy a whole BTG. Also, may God have mercy on Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question about the AH-64 Apaches, a lot of things in the American arsenal could, of course, wipe out large amounts of Russian forces. The thing is, though, is that diplomatically, would that push Russia over the brink and freak them out to the point that they would enter a war? And that's kind of the question that you have to answer whenever sending supplies to Ukraine. And I believe that's maybe why, although a Lend-Lease agreement was signed by the United States to then send equipment over to Ukraine, we haven't actually been hearing any news about fighter aircraft or multi-role aircraft being sent over to Ukraine to support their war effort. Of course, we'll be watching for news about that, but as of right now, I do think that those will not be sent over. But as far as the information you were giving about the Apache is, of course, an incredibly competent fighting helicopter. Attack helicopter is the correct term for that. And we do know that it is, of course, America's best at the moment. So, unfortunately, I can't really give you an answer as to whether those will be sent over or not, but I do have to agree that they're incredibly competent helicopters, and I believe that they would be put to great effect, especially the newer versions of the AH-64 that can actually pretty much hover at treetop level, but due to the camera systems that have now been installed on board, they can actually look over the tree line, which is a very interesting addition, and it is very relevant in the modern fighting world, where helicopters have have to fly at treetop level or below treetop level to be used without being shot down. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to return to the Southern Front news, the news around the world, and finally the address from President Zelenskyy. And so with that, on to the last question of this segment.
And the last question of the segment goes to Kaltenberg, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Hi, Nim."
Hi, Nim. I'm Enforcer. Nice to meet you. Of course, it's wonderful to get some support, and I hope that that did put a little smile on your face right there. And of course, your support does help this channel to keep on running and keep on delivering the news. So thank you so much once again. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. I thank you all so much once again for your support and the super chats. If you did send in a super chat and it hasn't been answered yet, do not fear, and I want to say this a lot, we will get to every single super chat sent in before the end of the night. So not only will you be supporting the channel, but we will recognize you for your support, and if you do have a question, we will answer that question to the best of our abilities. And so with that, we're now going to move down to the Mariupol area and cover the small amount of news we've gotten there today. Today we've seen a little bit of push and push back, as we've seen pro-Russian forces trying to storm the Azovstal on film today. Here's that footage right here. Here we can see supposedly DPR special forces. I would have to say that every single bit of special forces in the DPR must be special because they are not doing well. But you can see them here trying to storm a wall near the side of the Azovstal complex. You can see the guys in the back here apparently didn't do too well in physical training because these guys are running like they're running through molasses. Look at that. So I don't think these special forces will be having as large of an effect as they're hoping they will. And even at that, we've seen today that the Azov is actually fighting back and trying to retake their defensive perimeter that they had around the plant just about a week ago. So here's the footage of the Azov and the 36th Infantry Brigade fighting heroically and valiantly to try and get back the ground they have lost inside of the Azovstal plant itself. We can actually see a small firefight unfolding in front of them as we can see the tracers fly. Of course, a step up from a Russian video because it actually proves that they are actually engaged in fighting with Russians. We can now see them fire another RPG. This is once again about the third rocket that they fired.
Все, выдвигаемся!
We now see the Ukrainians firing back. We can see someone firing from inside. Well, actually, that was the soldier on film. He was actually firing inside of this metal door. Now that I know the context, let me go back and watch that again because I was confused for a second. But we can now see him firing inside of the door, and we can see sparks flying up as the bullets ricocheted off of a wall, most likely. Some kind of explosion rocked through the building right then, and we can now see drone footage of the building that he may have been fighting at, which has been nearly destroyed. I'm not really sure, due to the grainy footage here, what they're highlighting. Apparently, they're highlighting the Azov defenders pushing through the plant. It was very hard to see in that still film, but we can now see the Ukrainian forces moving through these abandoned vehicles and destroyed buildings with incredible speed, much faster than their DPR counterparts, as they are fervently trying to regain the ground that they have lost inside of the Azovstal. With that, that is the end of the news that we have in Mariupol today. It's a very small amount, but it is painting a picture that there is a desperate struggle for the Russians to take the Azovstal as a whole, and for the Ukrainians and the Azov to retake the Azovstal and hold it entirely as a whole. So we'll, of course, be keeping as much of an eye as possible on the Azov area. the Azovstal area in particular, and seeing if the Ukrainians are able to manage re-securing their defensive perimeter around the plant. Of course, we always have high hope for the Azov. They have been achieving the impossible for an incredibly long time, and so in terms of their abilities as fighters, I will not underestimate them from here on. They've managed to supersede everyone's expectations around the world over and over, and so I'm just going to say I wish them the best of luck, and we really don't know how anything's going to go down there. We're now going to move up to the area of Zaporizhia, where we can see that it's not only soldiers doing their best along with firefighters and police, volunteers have now taken it upon themselves to produce arms inside of a workshop in Zaporizhia. This is, of course, from the Associated Press, which was a very interesting clip that they put together. And here we can see all the volunteers at work to make body armor and other infantry equipment. We can now see them hoisting a Ukrainian flag inside of the workshop. And as we can see, everyone is doing their part in the defense of their country, creating camouflage netting.
Разные мотивации, разные причины. Люди здесь из тех городов, которых практически уже нет. Здесь очень много бомжей. Это те, которые потеряли свои дома в Мариуполе, в Пологовском районе, ну, из разных городов. Как вы думаете, что они здесь делают? Они приносят пользу своей армии, дабы уничтожить и выгнать этих уродов, которые уничтожили их жизнь. Война и смерть, поймите, я знаю, что это. Это плохо. Это плохо, это слезы, это горе, это разочарование в собственной жизни. У меня на этой войне сын погиб. Что для меня это значит?
And as we can see at the end of the video, the volunteers are slaving away every single day to try and provide the best equipment possible so the fighting soldiers on the front, and also make sure that they can win the war that much sooner. We actually saw only 2 bits of equipment being produced: camouflage netting and armored vests. Of course, regardless of what they're producing, any amount counts, and we can see that every civilian is doing their part in the defense of the nation. With that, we're now going to move further up the Dnieper River, that's correct, to the town of Dnipro. That's kind of where the tongue twister came in my head, Dnieper and Dnipro. And we can see that Russian saboteurs are actually operating behind Ukrainian lines and blew up a railroad track. Now, I'm going to show you all this, and then, of course, I'm going to negate what they actually did, because they didn't do anything, and I'll explain why. Here we can see the explosion rock the camera, and we can hear small amounts of gravel falling down to the ground after the explosion. But you now see another explosion further down the tracks, and you can actually hear the catenary lines above the railroad snap as the explosion apparently broke them. Now, here's what doesn't matter about this explosion. The Russian saboteurs are stupid, and here's why. You can destroy a railroad track incredibly easy. What they did, they actually destroyed the railroad track on film. The thing is that a railroad crew can come out there and replace the railroad ties as well as the actual tracks themselves within a day. And so the actual amount of damage they've inflicted on the Ukrainian supply lines by railroad is negligible, and it's a minor inconvenience at best. The thing that you want to try and target when in a sabotage operation is you're trying to target railroad bridges, because those actually take a decent amount of time to construct, and so you will be hindering supply lines throughout the entirety of the war, the rest of the war, if you were to destroy the railroad bridge instead of the railroad tracks. What they did was just waste time and resources, and of course, I'm very happy to say that, considering that they could have actually used that to blow up a railroad bridge, perhaps. With that, we're now going to move on to the area of Kremenchuk, where today we've seen that citizens have gone out and started to find rocket fragments on the ground. We haven't gotten any reports of an explosion there lately, but this does seem to indicate that there was some kind of rocket attack that did occur in Kremenchuk sometime not too long ago. So with that, here's the film that's showing the bits of rocket. So with that, that's the end of the video, but you could see a fragment of a rocket there on the ground that the Russians did use to attack Kremenchuk. Of course, we don't really know the extent of the damage. That's all the information we've gotten about a rocket attack there, which is interesting to me. With that, we're now going to move outside of the country, and we're now going to move to the area of Slovenia. Slovenia is a very small country in the former area of Yugoslavia. As of late, the Slovenians, of course, have been picking the side of the Ukrainians and have been providing arms and aid to the Ukrainians the best they can. Today, we've seen that one of the heavy weapons plants that was providing that equipment has caught on fire. No one's really sure why, but some people are claiming that it may have been Russian saboteurs. You can see the fire in the background, most likely destroying most of this heavy weapons plant, and it is incredibly close to residential areas. Hopefully this fire can be quelled incredibly quickly and the damage to surrounding areas can be mitigated, but it is a very interesting sight to see that after this specific heavy weapons plant provided arms to Ukraine, it is now caught on fire. With that, we're now going to move on to the last bit of news for the day. And of course, we're going to hear from the greatest politician of our age, President Zelenskyy. So here's the address from the President of Ukraine. And of course, I'm going to unmute this, put it on full screen, and start it from the very beginning.
Українці, українки, наші захисники і захисниці. Я не втомлююсь повторювати ці слова, звертаючись до усіх, хто захищає державу. Сьогодні ці слова звучать особливо у Міжнародний день медичної сестри. Професійне свято десятків тисяч українок, а також і українців, медичних братів, які роблять одну з найголовніших справ для перемоги. Рятують життя наших воїнів, наших цивільних людей. Мав честь сьогодні вручити державні нагороди і відзнаки представницям цієї професії, тим, хто під ворожими обстрілами та у час окупації не припиняли працювати і рятувати людей. Тетяні Тарасенко, Алі Чернець та Людмилі Гусак із Сумської області, Вірі Целик, Оксані Уманець та Ірині Вернигорі з Чернігова, Оксані Баландіній з Луганської області, Світлані Клименко та Марії Адаменко з Київщини, Наталі Абашник з Харкова. Від усього серця я дякую усім медичним сестричкам, усім медичним працівникам і працівницям, які щодня і щоночі допомагають українцям боротися. І я закликаю сьогодні усіх, хто ще не встиг подякувати їм, зробіть це. І 8 років війни на Донбасі, і 2 роки пандемії, і 3-й місяць повномасштабної війни, та й усе своє професійне життя вони присвячують вам, нам, всім, суспільству, тому, щоб Україна жила. Мені було дуже приємно побачити умови роботи наших медиків в Центрі дитячої кардіології та кардіохірургії у Києві. Новий корпус центру був побудований в рамках нашої програми «Велике будівництво». І це дійсно сучасний корпус. У ньому відчуваєш, що наша медична система, що наша медицина дійсно може бути на одному рівні з найкращими світовими медичними системами. Ми вкладалися в розвиток медицини та всієї соціальної інфраструктури до війни, і ми обов'язково продовжимо робити це після війни. Хай окупанти не сподіваються, що вони нас зупинять. За час бойових дій з 24 лютого російські війська зруйнували 570 закладів охорони здоров'я, повністю знищили 101 лікарню. Що це таке? Це дурість, це варварство, це самознищення самої Росії як держави, на яку хоча б хтось у світі міг дивитися як на культурну націю. Сьогодні вночі вони нанесли удар по Чернігівщині. І ще й по школах. Звичайно, російська держава в такому стані, що будь-яка освіта їй тільки заважає. Але чого можна досягнути знищенням шкіл, знищенням українських шкіл. Усі російські командири, які віддають такі накази, просто хворі і невиліковно. Але всі лікарні, які окупанти зруйнували, всі школи, всі університети, які вони розбомбили, всі будинки, мости, підприємства, ми усе відновимо. Окупанти били сьогодні ще й по Полтавщині, по Кременчугу, знову по заводу, щоб у людей просто не було бензину. Реально хворі. По Запорізькій області, по містам і селам Донбасу. Але що це їм дає? Російська стратегічна поразка очевидна вже всім у світі і навіть тим, хто ще продовжує з ними спілкуватись. Просто у Росії поки немає сміливості це визнати. Вони боягузи і намагаються сховати правду за ракетними, авіаційними та артилерійськими ударами. Тому наше завдання – боротись, поки ми не досягнемо своїх цілей у цій війні. Звільнити нашу землю, наших людей і надійно гарантувати нашу безпеку. Говорив сьогодні з президентом Фінляндії, обговорили з ним євроінтеграцію України та оборонну взаємодію. Говорив із президенткою Словаччини Зузаною Чапутовою, подякував за надану Україні підтримку, домовились про наступні кроки по всьому спектру відносин, оборона, санкції, економіка, зокрема імпорт пального і подальше зближення з Європейським Союзом. Готуються продовжувати спеціальні формати спілкування з дружніми суспільствами, зокрема зі студентами країн-партнерів. Скоро звертатимусь до американських студентів, також і до студентів країн Європи. Маємо поширювати наші українські ідеї і роз'яснювати на всіх рівнях, яким саме ми, українці, бачимо життя Європи і світу після цієї війни. Війни, яка змінює все в світовій політиці. Вдячний другу України прем'єр-міністру Нідерландів Марку Рютте за сьогоднішнє звернення до Верховної Ради України. Це важливий жест підтримки. А ще важливіше те, що Нідерланди адвокатують відмову від російської нафти і готові реалізувати це без зволікання. Підписав укази про нагородження наших захисників. Звання Герою України присвоєно полковнику Качеру Роману Володимировичу, командиру 55-ї окремої артилерійської бригади оперативного командування «Схід» сухопутних військ. Державними нагородами відзначено 269 військовослужбовців Збройних сил України. З них 14 посмертно. Вічна слава усім, хто став на захист України, вічна пам'ять кожному і кожній, хто віддав життя за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that was the address from the President of Ukraine here on May 12th of this year. Of course, he's been giving daily addresses every single day of this war, and I have nothing but respect for the effort that he's put into making sure that his nation will be well defended and well cared for. And so with that, that is the end of tonight's news. If you have been watching the entire time and you did ask a question with @Enforcer or @EnforcerMatt on it, or if you send in a super chat, stick around. Of course, all the super chats will be answered, and some of the live chat questions that were added to Enforcer or Enforcer Matt will be addressed as well. If you are getting off at this point, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you are new to this channel. We do run these streams covering the news of the war in Ukraine every single day of the week, except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. So I thank you all once again, and with that, we're now going to move on to the questions. And with that, what do we have, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $20 donation from MMC, who says, Enforcer and Matt, thanks for your dedication and support for Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I am glad that you enjoy the efforts we've gone through. I'm very proud of the nearly $250,000 that we've raised for fundraisers around the world in support of Ukraine, and I have to say, I'm more than proud of the Lee Spring Army and everything that we've done. So thank you once again for watching and enjoying the stream, and also helping us to keep on going and making sure that we can do all the good things that we try and do every single week. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up, we have a $20 donation from Makara, who says, "Keep up the good work. I disagree. A white peace would mean war later on with a rebuilt Russian military. While Ukraine has the eyes of the world and their support, this is the best time to recover all territory."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but I don't believe that the Ukrainians will really have a choice, you see, because while Western support is here now, it could, of course, start to fade away as the war continues to go on and people just start to lose interest in it, because that is, of course, something that does happen. I do believe that it would be a more attainable goal for the Ukrainians to try and retake the ground that they've lost to the Russians so far, and then not really go any further. Of course, if a war does continue, that does mean more Ukrainian lives will be lost, and the Ukrainians will, of course, be dragging on this war and the destruction of their country a bit longer. And I know that freedom is, of course, more important than surviving, but they would be free if they did win this war and just ceded Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea to the Russians. And I believe that in all practicality, while it would be an idealistic goal to try and retake Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk, I just don't believe that it's possible considering the circumstances. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I do understand completely where you're coming from. It's just that actually looking at it and standing back and looking at it from a non-biased position, I don't think those are attainable goals for the Ukrainians, although they could surprise me and I could be wrong. So with that, I thank you once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Timothy Hardesty, who says, "I worked on railways in Ireland. 18 men can relay 2 miles of rail in just 8 hours, a bridge in just 10 hours, but I won't say that is the best cause. Russians are listening. You do well to remember that fact."
Yes, I would, but then again, that is something of a bit of a commonly known fact. I mean, like, that's much more commonly known, at least as far as I know, and the friend circles I'm in, than actual military tactics. Because here in the Civil War in the United States, that's what Union saboteurs and Confederate saboteurs would go for when they were able to get behind the lines, is that they would try and go for railroad bridges. So I thank you very much for the support. Of course, Russians are listening, but I don't think they've learned. I mean, they've listened to my stream for a load of time now, around 80 days at this point, and they still haven't reaped or learned a single thing from what I said. And so while I make sure to not give out too much information, that is, of course, something I'm not too afraid to give out, and I'm sure that the Ukrainians are guarding the railway bridges. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do get where you're coming from, though. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a super chat from a channel regular, ZyperSniper1, who puts in a $15 donation and says, "Looks like those lucky Ukrainians who fired those missiles on Donetsk River and destroyed that huge convoy. We can see those lucky Ukrainians just had a huge jump on the KD ratio."
Well, I can entirely agree with that. And while KD ratio is something that's become a large video game term, the KD ratio was actually something that originated in Vietnam, surprisingly enough, because during that war, of course, the Americans actually didn't gain any ground, and so they had to measure their success based off of how many VC and NVA troops that they killed versus how many American soldiers that were killed in return. And so while this war isn't being fought in those regards, the kill to death ratio is, of course, a very important thing to lay out, because it shows how much resources the Ukrainians are expending to destroy a certain number of Russian resources. And right now, I believe that the figures are actually close to around 8 or 9 to 1, which means that for every 9 units of Russian equipment that's destroyed, 1 unit of Ukrainian equipment is destroyed. And when I say unit, that's a very loose term. That could be an infantryman, that could be a tank, a helicopter, a plane, but right now the ratio is 9 Russian units per every 1 Ukrainian unit, which is a massively high kill-to-death ratio. With that, I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $11 donation from Rob Scott, who says, "How much to have you remove the sirens in your intro?" Now, there's a question.
Well, that's an interesting question, but the thing is, the reason why I put in the sirens is because it is a war, and those sirens, of course, are a very eerie part of war, and I do believe that there's something that is kind of a bit of iconic in its own way at this point. So I'm not really a big fan of removing the sirens. And you also, a lot of people say, can you remove the beeping? But the beeping is Morse code, and it actually has a hidden message in it that a few people here on the chat have actually discovered what it means. And I've, of course, told them whenever I can find their comments in the comments section that they are correct. But still, at the same time, I'm not really wanting to remove any of that because I feel like the air raid sirens are an important part of this war. It's something that probably everyone in that country has heard, and I think that's something that the world should hear, because if it puts other people around the world into a little bit of fear, you can imagine what kind of fear the Ukrainians are under. So I thank you very much for the support, but honestly, I'm not really wanting to remove them. And also, the Morse code message will be changing here incredibly soon. I'll actually change it out for another message and let y'all have fun deciphering that one. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have an $11 donation from another channel regular, Level 70, who says, the Russians have reportedly surrounded Severodonetsk on 3 sides. Are the Ukrainians still lacking artillery in that area to hold the Russians back?
No, they're not lacking artillery in any part of the front line from what I've been able to tell. And as far as my map has been concerned, Severodonetsk has been surrounded on 3 sides over the past 2 weeks of this offensive nearly, as the Russians have been in Rubizhny for an incredibly long time. They've also been on the eastern side of the city and the southern side of the city as well. So as far as my information has been, they've been surrounded on 3 sides for quite a while. So the situation hasn't worsened. It's just been like that for the entirety of the offensive. So I hope that answers the question, and I do thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Tito McLovin, who says, poll time. Which of these acronyms would the Leaf Spring Army pick for ORC? Number 1, occupying Russian criminals. Number 2, overrated Chechens. Or number 3, opposing reluctant conscripts. Or number 4, overhyped retreating commies.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. I think I'll try and make that as a poll. If Matthew could put down a note for me, I'll try and put that down as the starting poll in tomorrow's stream. But I don't want to do that right now because it'd take me about maybe a minute or 2 to type that thing up. And I don't want to keep people kind of like waiting around for me to type, so I thank you very much for the support. Matthew will make a note of that. So Matthew, please make sure to make a note of that and remind me of that by tomorrow's stream, so that way I can put that up during the countdown, and we will make sure to put that poll up and see what everyone prefers. But I do thank you very much for your support, and we will make sure to run that poll at the first thing tomorrow. So with that, thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, let me recognize 2 $10 donations. We have one from Alex Simashov, and we have one from, well, actually that's the only one. Thank you very much, Alex, for your donation to the channel, and it is very much appreciated. Up next, we have a $10 donation from Steve Kai, who says, any sunken sub news?
We haven't gotten any sunken sub news. We did see that video here on this channel, although I didn't upload it onto the news, of something exploding under the water out in the Black Sea, but we didn't get any follow-up news on it. So right now, we're not really sure if that was a submarine or something else. So unfortunately, we haven't gotten any sub news, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question and give a little bit of a lead up to the story that you're talking about. So thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Sean Collins, who says, better than Rocket. Oh, wait, a question. No, better than Rocket.
What does he mean?
I have no clue.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I think I'll agree with you. I think I may have an idea of what you're talking about, and I will agree with you. So thank you very much once again. It does support this channel, and I would like to make that clear to everyone again, because every once in a while I have people come through and they say, oh my god, this guy is taking these super chats and he's not donating them to Ukraine. And the answer is, well, yeah, this is how the channel's supported. So to everyone who's wondering what's up with the super chats, they're supporting this channel and helping me to survive, because this takes up about 70 hours a week of my time. So the super chats are to support me and the channel and help me to keep going. So I thank you all once again for the super chats and also helping me to continue running this. And if you would like to put your money towards supporting Ukraine, we do run fundraisers every single Sunday, just for everyone to know. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And thank you very much again, Sean, for the support. And up next, we have a $10 donation from Will Riley, who does not have a Dick Cheney comment tonight. He says, if you want to about American units and other foreign fighters like the at Dirty Dozen, who has the hit Norwegian Parliament chick, check out at Rip Rawlings on Twitter.
Unfortunately, I wouldn't really be able to talk about that too much. Was that really a suggestion? I couldn't really tell. Could you paraphrase that one for me?
Let's see here. I'm not really sure what he's referring to. I might be able to loop on what he's referring to.
Could you reread that one more time for me? Because I think I may have misunderstood what it was saying.
So he said, if you want to about American units and other foreign fighters like the at Dirty Dozen, who has the hit Norwegian Parliament chick, check out at Rip Rawlings on Twitter.
I think you're talking about checking someone out for news about the Foreign Legion units, and I thank you very much once again, Will Riley, for the continued support, and I will try and check them out as soon as possible. So with that, I thank you once again, and I will try and take a look over there and see if I can find some Foreign Legion news. And with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of, the next question.
And next up, we have a question from DJ Bonebreaker, who puts in a $10 donation and says, the DPR Special Forces look like they deploy from the back of a short bus, LOL.
Oh, no. Well, I thank you very much for the support, and honestly, I'd have to agree. They don't really look like they're well put together, so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Tanjan Brigiri, who says, keep up the good job.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and of course, Super Chats help us out a long way in making sure that we can keep on doing this. Once again, I have to thank you all so much for supporting the channel. We don't run ads or anything like that, and I've given this spill before, but I feel like it's important for everyone to know is that y'all are supporting this channel and helping it to keep running, and so every time y'all send in support, it's a huge amount of support to us because it actually keeps us running. So thank you once again for the support, and I thank you so much for enjoying the work we do here. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $10 donation from Will Riley, who puts in a Dick Cheney comment this time. He says, almost forgot, Dick Cheney gets a writer credit for the Bayraktar song.
I would agree. I think Dick Cheney and his brilliance could only come up with the Bayraktar song completely on his own. So I thank you so much for the support, William Allen. I thought it was bizarre that we didn't get a Dick Cheney comment from you tonight, and there it was right there. So I thank you so much once again for the support, and I do thank you for bringing up Dick Cheney again. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Bob A., who says, Enforcer, my Ukrainian friends say Dnieper is not the Ukrainian word. They say it is Dnipro River in Ukrainian. Slava Ukraine.
Thank you very much for the support, and I'll try and keep that in mind. I do believe on Google Maps, if I zoom in, it's called the Dnipro River. I've always heard it being called the Dnieper River, and I've also seen it spelled like that before. I think that actually may be one of those Russian spelling, Russian spelled versions of the river, and I've just kind of been using that. So I'll try and change that. That's probably a lot easier to remember than Dnieper, because I'm always saying Dnieper and then Dnipro city. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for clarifying that as well. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $12 donation from Tanner, who says, just my weekly donation. I can't believe you don't like grits. Thanks again, Tanner B., Augusta, Georgia. And that's actually me that doesn't like the grits. I think Enforcer likes them, but I can't stand them.
They're decent. I mean, like, I can eat them, but I don't exactly like them or hate them. You know, they're just kind of like a food. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do thank you for your weekly donation towards this stream and helping us to keep on running. And so thank you once again for the support. It does mean a lot to us. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $10 donation from Diffuse56, who says, sorry if I missed while I was AFK. Do you have any news about the Russian cargo ship that the Ukrainians hit yesterday?
I do not have any news on that. I haven't actually heard about that either, so unfortunately I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that, but I will be looking out for news on it and seeing if we can get any developments on it. So I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that kind of does answer the question in a way, in saying that I haven't heard about it. So thank you once again for the support. We will look into it, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Ole Wolansky, who says, in case you played the Bayraktar song in full, by mistake, quotation marks, and need to pay up.
What?
He said he basically is saying he's donating the $10 to help cover, any copyright issues.
Oh, well, I thank you so much for the support. And we actually found out from Ronnie Fitt at Funker530 that the Bayraktar song is actually copyright free, and that's why it's now been added into the waiting music at the start of the stream. We're also going to be filtering out the music. I kind of have a plan to keep the intro and the countdown a little bit different every night. We're actually going to start switching out the music a little more often. At least one song will be rotated out every single night, and there will be a new one in its place. And also, once people start to pick up on what the Morse code message is, the Morse code messages will change as well. And so I'm trying to make the countdown a little bit more interesting, so that way people get a little bit of a varied music, in their waiting room. And so with that, I thank you very much for the support. It's, of course, a huge deal. Of course, it helps us out a lot. And I do thank you very much for supporting us in playing the Bayraktar song. So thank you very much once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from a longtime channel supporter, William Allen, who says, as a granddad that has a grandson that does ride a short bus, great observation. Whoop. By the way, he's smarter than Putin.
I would have to agree that anyone in the world is smarter than Putin. So I thank you very much for the support, William Allen. And also, I thank you for having a good sense of humor. Sometimes people don't understand, and I don't know why, but people don't understand that sometimes jokes are made, and sometimes they, of course, are like that. We actually had some people coming through about Mr. Lunchtime saying, hey, wow, what the, like at this point, it's like, you almost can't joke about anything because there's always someone out there who's got a problem with it. But I do thank you very much for going with the joke and understanding it. And thank you once again for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from Mari Bell. Thank you very much for your support of the channel and your continued viewership. We appreciate it very much. And up next, we have a $7 donation from Mark Hackney, who says, what is your estimate of how long this war will last in view of recent developments? I estimate that it'll end by October.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I have answered this question before, and my answer is, and I'm sorry, it's kind of a cop-out, but I don't really do a lot of fortune telling that far into the future. That's kind of getting into a very questionable area when talking about estimations. My estimations are usually only a few weeks out into the future because that's something that you can predict with relative certainty. But going months into the future and predicting when the war will end is something that I don't really think is possible. Because while it may end in October, what if the Russians actually pulled it together in the south and they actually started to make progress and actually pushed up and captured Zaporizhia, and then they were on the doorsteps to Dnipro? That would change the course of this war, and it would go on for much longer. So stuff like that I don't really weigh in on. If I had to give an estimation, it's going to last for quite some while, at least several months at this point, from what I'm assuming, because it looks like the Russians are starting to slow down their operations and go in for the long run. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way, but I don't think it's really possible to predict when the war will end with certainty when the end time is months away. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that kind of does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have another $5 donation from William Allen, who says, do you read the comments to your shorts videos daily?
I do, you'll see me going through and hearting a lot of them, because I do read every single one of them as much as I can. Sometimes I do miss them, like for example on the filming day, I didn't read any comments because I just didn't have time. I had to, go film and then immediately come home and start the stream. So in regards to that, I didn't read any of the comments that day, but I read them every other day, and I go through and heart them and stuff. So just know that whatever you say, I will probably see it. So, with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from a channel legend, Junebug72, who says, I have too much, I'm not really sure what she meant to say there, but I think she meant to say, I have too much to say, so I just listen. You both are grounding and truly run a brilliantly unique channel. I know you are aware by now, but true compliments are due. Thank you both, and may victory be soon and recovery underway. And thank you for the kind words, Junebug. We appreciate it very much.
And I gotta thank you so much as well, Junebug. You've been around for an incredibly long time, helping us to support this channel and also asking some interesting questions. And of course, it's always an honor to know that we have a large amount of viewers that do enjoy these streams a whole lot and always come back to listen to it. There's a million people out there who do this kind of stuff, but y'all like my stuff and watch it a lot. So I thank you very much once again, Junebug, and I do thank you for the kind words. It's of course something interesting to me because I just think I'm being me, but a lot of people just love it. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, I want to recognize a $5 donation from Casa Cabasa de Fogo. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. As always, very much appreciated. And up next, we have a $5 donation from Tim Swenson, who says, any chance of getting a translation on the Bayraktar song?
I think there may be a chance of getting a translation for that, but it wouldn't be a speech-to-text kind of thing in the countdown screen. So I think the best thing to do if you want a translation for the Bayraktar song is to go pull it up on YouTube, because I'm sure that someone has made an English translation version of it. But with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Captain Chris 1220, who is a longtime channel viewer. He says, I like your stuff and watch a lot.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it. Of course, you know, I was just here originally trying to report the news, and it's always an honor to know that while I'm just trying to report the news and get the information out, a lot of people do enjoy it as well. So with that, thank you so much, Captain Chris, for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up, we have a $5 donation from Big Dog CNC, who says, how do you know where a Russian 300 fought? If he comes home with one arm, he was at Chernobivka. If he comes home with three, he was at Chernobyl. LOL.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I like the joke. That's actually pretty good. I didn't expect that. I thought you were going to go through like the whole thing, like if someone lost a leg, they were here. If someone lost both legs, they were here. I didn't know that you were going to make a Chernobyl joke, so I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for adding in something funny there. That was, of course, a pretty good one, and I liked it. So thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Hegemony Cricket, who says, if the Javelin missile is called Saint Javelin, then the NG law should be called Mother NG law.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I like the little observation there. I have actually seen some people making little saints for the in-law now as well, and I think that that's starting to become a thing too. So I thank you very much for the support. I do think that that's actually a pretty fitting name right there for the in-law, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Ben, who says, all progress so far will come to nothing if Sam's power is not maintained against possible Russian air dominance in the future months. Any news? ?
Could you rephrase that one again so that way I could get a pretty good understanding of it?
He said, all progress so far will come to nothing if SAM's, or SAM's, power is not maintained against possible Russian air dominance in future months. Do you have any news?
We don't have any news on the supply chains for anything in Ukraine. Operator Starsky actually confirmed to me that it's not my slacking on trying to find logistics news, because I try with everything I have. It's actually that the Ukrainians keep their logistical information top secret nearly. All of their logistical operations have very tight lips on everything going on with them, and so no one really knows, not even the Ukrainian military for the large part, knows how the supply lines are being run. Which is really weird when you think about it. But still, we don't know how well those surface-to-air missile batteries are being supplied at all, because we don't even know how well the infantry units are being supplied. We don't know how it operates, how they're getting the supplies from the western side of the country to the eastern side. We just know that they are making them over to the eastern side. And so right now, based off of the video evidence that we've been getting, it looks like the surface-to-air missile defense batteries of the Ukrainians are well supplied, and they will stay operational for a long time into the business. Oh, well, a long time into the war and the business of it. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from William Allen, who has been supporting the channel tremendously tonight, and thank you very much, William, for that. He says, by the way, I just want to remind you that the U.S. Navy has been training Ukrainian river rats for offensive ops. Ukraine has a long river all the way to the coast. Just saying.
Well, I thank you so much for the support once again, William Allen. You've supported this stream a whole load tonight. And to answer your question, I have not heard about that, and I thank you very much for sharing it. The river you're talking about in particular is the Dnipro River, which we actually found out is not the Dnieper. I believe that's the Russian pronunciation. It's the Dnipro, much like the city of Dnipro. The river actually has several dams on it, so I don't know if a boat can actually travel the entire length of the Dnieper. I'm sure that there's some kind of a spillway or a lock system. This actually looks like one here, and we can pull that up on Google Maps real quick and see for ourselves if there is a lock system going down this river. Not the Ukraine war, we just want Ukraine itself on Google Maps. Now let's take a look at these dams and see if they have some kind of a lock system or something like that that would allow ships to pass through. So up here is a dam, and we can see that they do have a lock system where ships can get in the lock, then be lowered down, and then move into the next segment of the canal. Also down here at Kremenchuk, we can see the same thing. Here's another lock system. That's okay. All right, I was just making sure that they actually went out into the open water. So they actually do have a lock system that allows boats to travel up and down the entirety of the Dnipro River. And so I believe that boat force would be very helpful for the Ukrainians. But the question is, how much of sitting ducks would they be once they reach the contested part of the Dnipro River south of Zaporizhia? And that's a question that would have to be answered once those units are actually fielded and we see how successful they are. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and I do thank you very much for sharing that information. I actually didn't know that such a training operation was undertaken by the U.S. Navy in helping out the Ukrainians with boat operations on rivers, which are usually called a brown water fleet. But anyways, thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from another channel legend, Trademarks and Patents for Growing Businesses. He says, in reference to railroads, blowing bridges is okay, but blowing switch machines and electric signal relay boxes is the golden easy move. Russia has about 200 replacements each. After those are used up and old ones are cannibalized, the trains stop.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, Trademarks and Patents. You've been around for an incredibly long time as well. And I have to say, I did not actually know that information. I'm a bit of a rail fan myself and enjoy watching a train, shoot by every once in a while. But I actually didn't know that it was very easy to knock out electrical signal relay boxes and pretty much just the signal boxes themselves. I didn't actually know that. I didn't know that there was such a small number of replacements available as well was inside of Russia. So I believe that that would be the best way for the Ukrainian saboteurs and the pro-Ukrainian saboteurs inside of Russia to conduct their sabotage activities. And hopefully the Ukrainians can stop the pro-Russian saboteurs inside of Ukraine from conducting those kinds of attacks. But I do thank you very much for the support and also sharing that with us, because that's a very interesting bit of information about how some sabotage operations may be operated now or in the future as to what they're targeting. So thank you once again, Trademarks and Patents. You've been around for a long time, and I'm very thankful for everyone's support, including yours as well, especially. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a user with a very creative username. He went out and created a whole account to do this. He puts in a $5 donation, and his name is Monsieur Lunchtime.
Monsieur.
He says, will the Ukrainians take me to a good restaurant or give me their own MREs if I surrender?
Well, Mr. Lunchtime, I've got to say, it's going to... this is bizarre that someone's going to make an account with Mr. Lunchtime, Monsieur Lunchtime. But to answer your question, Monsieur Lunchtime, I think that if you surrender to the Ukrainians, the food shortage that they're talking about now is going to become that much worse. I don't know if the Ukrainians will take you, but I believe that they will try and feed you for however long they have food supplies. So I thank you so much for the support, Monsieur Lunchtime, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, I thank you so much for the support, and also the crazy joke that you did right there, naming an account Monsieur Lunchtime. That's crazy. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Bearcat, who says, yeah, that time Enforcer called me BC Skyman, good times. That's okay, I'll still buy you a cup of coffee.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I'm sorry for the grievous offense that I've done. For some reason, BC Skyman does pop up in my head a decent bit. He is one of our regular supporters here on this channel, and so, I get used to talking about certain supporters like Zeta Lane, Speed Break, which they haven't been around much, but I still remember. Let's see, Trademarks and Patents, William Allen, like BC Skyman and a million others. And so I remember them a lot. And so sometimes I just think that I'm talking to them sometimes. So I'm sorry about the, a bit of a mistake right there. I'll make sure to try and not do that in the future. But I do thank you very much for the support. And I do thank you a lot for making sure that our coffee fund will continue to go on so that we can continue to drink our coffees and continue to report on this news of the war in Ukraine. So thank you once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $5 donation from Angie Kiefer, who says, "Good evening, Enforcer and Leaf Spring Army. Is Snake Island in range of any kind of artillery or MRLs that Ukraine has?"
Did he say the Kerch Bridge?
I don't think so.
Could you reread that one for me real quick?
They say, "Is Snake Island in range of any kind of artillery or MRLs that Ukraine has?"
Let's see. From the coast, it is around 30 miles away. So the answer to that question is yes, it would be within range of certain kinds of artillery units, but not all of them, of course. So yes, it is within artillery striking range, although I'm not really sure if the Ukrainians will pursue that strategy on attacking Snake Island. But of course, we'll have to wait and see. That may be something that the Ukrainians might try and conduct. Of course, using artillery is cheaper and more economical than using drones or aircraft to attack the island. So thank you very much for the support once again, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And the next one is from Rick Clay, who puts in a $20 donation and says, "Did you hear anything about Russians capturing any U.S. howitzers? Looks like a withdrawal from Kharkiv. Russian FSB predicted late June, ending of the war with Russian economy and runs, and a military stalemate or loss."
Interesting. Did you hear anything about Russians capturing any U.S. howitzers? I have not heard about the Russians capturing any U.S. howitzers as of the moment. It appears that all of the M777s are incredibly far behind the lines. They have a great range compared to the Russian artillery. And so I don't think there will be a chance of M777s being destroyed frequently or being captured at all, considering that they'll just be so far behind the lines, firing at the Russians from there. Moving on to the next part of that question, looks like a withdrawal from Kharkiv. I'm not really sure if you're talking about a withdrawal from the Ukrainian side near Kharkiv or the Russian side, because our information right now is actually suggesting that the Russians are the ones that are being pushed out of the Kharkiv area. Not that they're withdrawing, and it looks like they're actually just being beat back. So I hope that kind of addresses that part of the question as well. And on to the last part, Russian SFB predicted late June ending of the war with Russian economy in ruins and a military stalemate or loss. And to that, I'm not really sure about that information. I haven't heard any reports from the Russian FSB as to when they think the war will end, but if they are predicting late June, I wouldn't really doubt that at all. I believe that a window in between October and June would be highly likely, although the war could end sooner, or it could end after that time window. But I do thank you very much for the support, Chris Clay, and I hope that does answer your question. You, of course, have been a longtime channel supporter as well. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have yet another super chat from William Allen, who puts in another $10 donation. He says, the Belarus have been hitting the railways from Russia. God love them.
Yes, that is true. We know that a lot of Belarusian saboteurs are operating within Russian Federation territory, and they're committing attacks on the railroads, the train tracks, and some of the bridges in some instances, as we have seen 1 or 2 bridges get destroyed. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can entirely agree with you that that is in fact what is happening over there. We know that the Belarusians apparently have a large group of their population that do not agree at all with the war that's going on, and that may be one of the reasons why the Belarusians have not entered this war, is a fear of massive civil unrest and massive revolts in the army. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can entirely agree with you that that is something happening. So thank you once again for the support, William Allen. You've supported us a whole load tonight, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from Notorious GRG, who says, "Espressos for you and Matt when coffee won't cut it. I remember when you had one before a stream once and you were talking over 90 miles an hour. And Notorious GRG, I have to say that I just cracked open a new box of Pike Place roast tonight for the Keurig, and it was like fresh as anything because that was some strong caffeine in that coffee, but we appreciate it very much.
And I do thank you so much for the support. And yes, the first time I drank a coffee, because up until then, I never really drank coffee at all, like ever. And so that was the first time I ever drank a coffee, and I was going a million miles an hour. I loved that back then because I actually drank the coffee well before the stream, like 3 hours before, and I would be churning out all my work and stuff. You know, on like a caffeine high. Now the coffees have started to wear off, and now I'm drinking them like 20 minutes before the stream and just like suffering through the part of compiling the news, you know, in terms of exhaustion. And so that way the presentation is as good as possible, but they still don't work like they used to. But I thank you so much, Notorious GRG, for the support, and also bringing up a memory of times long past. That was a long time ago, and I thank you so much for being around on the stream that long to remember it. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support once again, Notorious GRG. It helps us out a load. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from CA Lags, who says, if Ukraine gets the Donbas and Crimea back, they can reclaim the natural gas resources they found in the Black Sea before Russia annexed Crimea. They may end up supplying with gas going forward.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree that if they are able to recapture Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk, they will be, of course, in a much better position than they will be without them. However, I do think that the situation is a little unattainable. It does look like while the Ukrainians are having some progress and making sizable counterattacks, there has been no movement on the Donetsk and Luhansk fronts in either direction, rather than the Ukrainians recapturing Marinka, which is the only major event that's happened on the entire front there. And also, the Ukrainians withdrew out Popasna. Those were the only two things that have happened on that entire front over 2.5, nearly 3 months of fighting at this point. Beyond that, though, just talking about the situation itself, if they were able to retake the Donbass as a whole and Crimea, that would, of course, put them in a great position to then start producing natural gas and exporting it to nations around the world, which could, of course, help bolster their economy a large amount, considering that they'll have a very readily available and high supply of natural resources to sell for some income. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree that is something that the Ukrainians would most likely like, although I'm not really sure if it will be possible for them. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question. CLX, you've also been a return supporter of the stream, and it's always greatly appreciated. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Hegemony Cricket again, who says, the Russians brag about their ability to drive across rivers up to 5 meters deep with snorkels on the tanks. It's always been a stupid idea and obviously not being used in Ukraine.
Well, thank you very much for the support, Hegemony Cricket. You're also one of our return supporters. And to answer that question, yes, I've seen them brag about that a lot. A lot of countries actually brag about that. We know that the Germans are very proud of the Leopard 2 main battle tank, which can also use the snorkel and go under a very large amount of water. However, though, it looks like the Russians have not used that one bit during the current war, and I think that's actually because they don't trust it. It actually takes a large amount of preparation to do, and I believe that they're thinking that in the amount of time it takes to prepare a tank to snorkel, it would just be much more efficient to use that time to erect a bridge over a river and then send the tanks over that instead. So that way they're putting a decent amount of time into laying out the way across the river up front, and then the tanks, are pretty much crossing effortlessly beyond that. So I believe that's why we haven't seen the snorkel method being used a lot, but I can agree it is a stupid idea in my opinion, and I believe that there's a lot that could go wrong with a tank with a snorkel attached. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does address the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And just for anybody that might be wondering, we do have 12 super chats left, so if I haven't gotten to yours yet, don't worry, it will be coming up. So up next, we have a $5 donation from Michael McDonald, who says, if Ukraine does push the Russians out of all Ukrainian territories, would Russia just reinvade in a year or two? Thank you.
No, they would not. That's something that a lot of people think is always possible, but the thing is that it takes a long time to rebuild a military, especially considering that the Russian economy has collapsed, and so they're not really in the position anymore where they can easily try and rebuild a military. So they wouldn't just attack within the next year or two, because they'd pretty much be in the same position they would be at the end of the war, and so it's not really a smart thing for them to do, and also the economic sanctions would come back down on them and hit them like a brick, and of course, that would not be good for them at all. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question, because that's really just the honest lowdown statement about that. It wouldn't be possible for them to do that again in a year or two. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next here, we have a $100 donation from William Allen. He's going absolutely bonkers tonight.
William.
He doesn't leave a comment, but he puts in a massive donation.
William, I thank you so much for the support, William. You've sent in a load of support in the questions, and now you're just sending in support as a whole. And I thank you so much, William. You're very nice. You're a very nice person, and you're helping us to continue running this channel. And of course, support like that is always huge, and we always appreciate it a lot. Some people, you know, I don't think some people get that this is the way Matthew and me eat. Is you know, by people supporting the channel. So that kind of support, of course, helps us to keep on doing this. And so I thank you so much, William, for sending in that massive amount of support. It helps us a lot, and I can't thank you enough for it. So I thank you once again. I would answer a question if there was one attached, but you just sent in support that time. But still, I appreciate it so much. It means a lot to me. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, let me recognize a couple of donations here. We have a $5 donation from WL, and we have a $5 donation from CA Jones. Thank you very much to both of you for your support. They don't leave comments, but thank you for your support of the channel. Up next, we have a $5 donation from Mr. Randalco, who says, the trident you refer to is actually called a trizub, or actually says it's pronounced trezub. This is the symbol of Ukrainian independence.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I actually talked to a few Ukrainians, and I believe that they called it a trident. We'll pull that up, though, and we'll see. I may be wrong, of course. Ukrainian trident. Coat of arms of Ukraine, the trizub. The coat of arms of Ukraine is a blue shield with a gold trident. So you are correct. It is called a trizub. But let me take a look at that again. Trizub. Officially return. Interesting. Well, I thank you very much for the support. It seems like it's kind of like how the coat of arms thing is, you know, where it's like it's not the coat of arms, it's the crest or it's the herald or something like that. But I do thank you very much for the support, and that is a technical change I will try and make in the future to call it a tricep. So thank you once again for the support, and thank you for bringing that up. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 donation from Labster, who says, do you think there is any possibility that Ukraine would go on the offensive into Russia to flank their lines east of Kharkiv, or Kharkiv? They have been shelling Belgorod, which is why not go on the offensive into it.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. And to answer that question, yes, they have been attacking Belgorod, but they haven't been shelling it like the Russians shell a Ukrainian city. Their attacks on Belgorod have been incredibly limited to military infrastructure and also oil and gas reserves that are inside the city. So I don't really think that would be something the Ukrainians would do either, because if they tried something like that, the Russians may be forced to call out a general mobilization and start trying to raise the entire military to go fight the war in Ukraine. So I'm not really exactly sure about that. Of course, I could be wrong. But then again, I'm thinking that that's something the Ukrainians wouldn't want to do. They are fighting a defensive war after all, and defensive wars don't really expand out beyond your national borders. So specifically when the Ukrainians are, you know, just trying to make sure that their nation survives, and they're not really trying to attack the Russians directly. But I do see where you're coming from, and that is a pretty sound strategy. I just don't think the Ukrainians will be pursuing it, considering they haven't pursued that anywhere else on the front line that they've recaptured. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $10 donation from William Ballman, and also a $5 donation from Applied Cryogenics, and they both say thank you.
Well, I thank you both so much for watching this channel and supporting this stream. It does mean a lot. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Simon Shorthouse, who puts in a $5 donation and says, what I wonder about if nearly 200,000 Russians were deployed and 20,000 have died, besides logistics, where are the rest of them? And I love your work.
Well, thank you very much for the support. To answer the question, as far as we know, the rest of them are, well, could you reread that question for me real quick, Matthew, just to make sure I get it right?
Yes, he said, what I wonder about if nearly 200,000 Russians were deployed and 20,000 have died, besides logistics, where are the rest of them?
The rest of them, where are you taking that as? The rest of them is in what, Matthew?
Just a moment here. I lost the question for a moment. I think he meant to say, like, where are the rest of them, the ones that haven't died?
Oh, well, the rest of them, most of the ones that haven't died are down here in the southeast. They moved most of their forces down here considering that the northern front collapsed, and it looks like they will never pursue a northern front again. Because most of their forces have been removed entirely, although there are small skirmishes that occur on the Ukrainian border up here, although they're not large by any means. So all the forces that aren't dead or wounded and have been removed from the field are down here in the southeast trying to fight to secure the Donbas, which they're failing miserably at. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, we have another $18 donation from Junebug72, who says, I think those with little manage to give the most. Okay, let me reread that. I think those with little manage to give the most, generally speaking. Have a restful evening, you two, and Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and it is true that a lot of the fundraising and charity work done around the world is done by people who have little, but they always give the most. And I think that shows that a lot of people have big hearts, and regardless of their actual position, they want to help out the best they can. And I think that's a very admirable trait in a lot of people, and I think that's a wonderful attribute to have. And so I thank you so much for the support and bringing that up. I'm not sure about the status of anyone in the Leave Spring Army, if that's what you're saying. I don't know if they're well off, not well off. It doesn't really matter to me anyways. Who cares? As long as they have the right mindset and they're out here trying to help out Ukraine too, I am more than happy to call them members of the Leave Spring Army and not care about anything else beyond that. But I do thank you so much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, William Allen puts in another $10 donation. Thank you so much, William. He says, I know you guys do appreciate it, but you'll get over it. Love you guys and Leaf Spring Army. Whoop.
Whoop. And I thank you so much for the support, William Allen. You just keep on sending in support. And I thank you so much. You are helping out the stream a whole load and helping us to continue going. So thank you once again for the support. And I hope that answers that comment. Of course, we're very appreciative of all of it. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Tito McLovin again. He puts in another $5 donation and says, it's better to eliminate train engineers than to destroy rail bridges. Training new engineers takes quite a while.
I do agree. That is very true. But also, destroying rail bridges may take some time to rebuild, depending on how large they are or how significant the damage is. So I thank you very much for the support. And I can agree that actually really both ways, any way that you can lash out of the railroad system in Russia would be an effective means of slowing down their logistical lines, whether it's taking out a bridge or taking out railroad engineers or anything in between. So I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Vasily, who says, remember the armored train? It was a scary news story for about a day. Then consensus went to, it's an ancient POS machine, outdated and useless. Haha.
Well, I do thank you very much for the support, and I do have to agree. And the weapons systems on that train were archaic, and it really couldn't have defended itself against anything. But I do thank you so much for the support, and I can agree that we do all need to remember the armored train and how it was scary for a second, and then everyone realized that it's just an armored train. So thank you once again for the support. I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have an $8 donation from DMAD100. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. And as always, we appreciate it very much. Every little donation helps us to keep the lights on over here, so thank you. Up next, we have a $5 donation from Raphael Harris, who says, I started the stream when we were fighting off Russians at Kiev Zoo. Enforcer and Zelenskyy share optimism and purpose that led the way to victory.
Well, thank you so much for the support. I don't know if I should be put up on the same level as Zelenskyy. Zelensky's another fella. And just to let y'all know what's in my head, I am going to try and get Zelenskyy on the stream. Now, that sounds wild, and a lot of people are probably thinking that's impossible. But one thing I've learned over the course of the stream is that nothing is impossible, and there have been loads of people who've been watching the stream that I had no idea were watching it. We've had a decent amount of the Funker 530 team come through. We've actually had Operator Starsky, people reaching out to him before I even was able to reach out to him in the first place. And so he had actually heard about this channel. And so in the deepest back part of my head, I'm thinking that there may be the slight chance that a high-up Ukrainian official has seen this stream, and hopefully I could get Zelenskyy on here. He was, of course, talking in a speech today about reaching out to the students of the United States and Europe, you know, like college students and stuff, and talking to them about Ukrainian values, ideas, and culture, and the future of Ukraine. And I was thinking, well, that sounds a lot like something we could do here on this stream. Maybe we could bring him on stream. So I'm actually going to try and reach out to the Ukrainian government and see if that's a possibility and have that scheduled, of course, for a Sunday. So hopefully that is something that is possible. And if it is, that would be the most incredible thing we've ever done on Earth, and hopefully we could blow a Sunday night fundraiser out of the water. I would try and raise $250,000 on that one live stream alone, because that would be I think everyone will want to show Zelenskyy how much support the Leaf Spring Army has for Ukraine and the right cause and the good fight around the world. So that's kind of what I've been thinking a little bit. So I'm, of course, trying to head towards that direction. We'll of course, not be giving any guarantees. It may not happen, but I'm still going to try and see if it's a possibility. Also been thinking about, and you know, of course, I'm just going to go through the whole list of people I'm trying to get around here. Funker 530 will probably be coming on the stream in the future. We've been in talks about that, me going over to his stream and him coming over here. We've been thinking about that. He'll probably be coming over with Operator Starsky onto a Sunday night fundraiser. And I've also been thinking way far out, Mr. Beast, who does not do anything about wars at all. You know, he's a general entertainment channel, but he does an incredibly good job at it. And he also raises money for incredible causes around the world, like Team Seas and Team Trees. And I was thinking maybe he could throw in a large amount of money or garner a large amount of support for a fundraiser that we could run here on this channel. I'm not really sure about which one it would go in that direction, but I have been thinking there as well. I've been trying to look down every single avenue possible to try and find as much support for Ukraine as I can. And so these are some of the options that I've been looking at and hopefully can pan out here in the future. So I thank you very much for everyone for the support. Once again, make sure to show up for the Sunday night fundraisers. That's the pride and joy of this whole entire stream. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, it looks like we have about 10 super chats left, and we are running pretty late. So would you like to go ahead and put a cutoff on the super chats for the night?
Yes, we are going to put a cutoff on all the super chats tonight. So I just want everyone to know that Paul Chow's super chat is the last one of the night. If you put in one beyond that, we won't be able to answer the question because we're running out of time, unfortunately. But if you are enjoying these streams, make sure to just throw in a, you know, like, well, go get some merch. That would be a better thing to do, because you will get something really cool out of it. You'll get a T-shirt or something like that. They're of course high quality, and I like them a lot. We of course designed the logos ourselves, and they're pretty nice, actually. So make sure if you want to support the channel and get something out of it, to go check out the merch. And with that, we're going to answer all of the super chats we have left for the night, and then we're going to answer a couple of questions from the live chat, and then we're going to end tonight's stream. And so with that, on to the next question, Matthew.
And up next, we have a $20 donation from Yoli H, who says, "Woot."
Woot! And I thank you so much for the support. It does help us out a lot. And with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Hegemony Cricket again, who says, Severodonetsk means North Donetsk in Russian and Ukrainian.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I actually did not know that. So I thank you very much for sharing that information with us, and I'm sure that came as news to everyone else in the chat. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And the next one is a $5 donation from Sonia Blade, who says, "Every day I return to the Enforcer stream because it's engaging and straight to the point. Thank you and keep up the great work."
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and it's good to know that we have longtime viewers supporting this channel and helping us out a lot. And I'm glad that you do enjoy this content. It does mean a lot to us for everyone to be enjoying what we do. And so I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a $5 donation from Night Hunter 321, who says, "Is there a possibility that Ukraine will cross the border into Russia and take border villages, roads, and or towns, or will they just stop at their own border?"
They're going to stop at their own border. Crossing into Russia will be threatening Russian sovereignty directly, and considering that will be a massive freakout for the Russian public, considering that the Ukrainians will actually be pushing the Russians back and taking Russian land, the Russians would be forced to fully mobilize the military, and then this war could drag on forever, and then it could also put the Ukrainians on the back foot if the Russians manage to mobilize properly. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question in brief. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have another $5 donation from Jiminy Cricket, and thank you for your continued support. He says, will the real Dick Cheney please stand up? Please stand up.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And I like the little joke there. Of course, you can always ask William Allen where Dick Cheney is. Dick Cheney is kind of like a pet for William Allen, so he's kind of the one who runs the whole Dick Cheney thing here. But I thank you very much for the support, and I like the joke. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Suzanne B, who says, fried chicken fund, hold the grits, and I couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you very much for the fried chicken fun. We will make sure to go out and get something delicious, of course. Most likely Chick-fil-A or KFC. They have like some of the best fried chicken. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I will hold the grits, I guess. So I thank you very much for once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And while we are holding the grits, we have a $5 donation from Philip Fixes, who says, I didn't get an alert for today's video. Did you upset the YouTube gods? I love the new opening. Stay gracious. Slava Ukraine.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I didn't actually know that some people didn't get the notification. That's nothing on our end. Sometimes YouTube just doesn't do that, but I'm not particularly why. I'm not particularly sure why, but I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that kind of answers the question about why it's an enigma to me. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Robert McIver, who says, at Enforcer Matt, computer working texting, did not miss a stream, not a geek, glad to be texting again.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and it's good to hear that you're back. So, of course, welcome back, and I'm glad that you are watching tonight's stream. So thank you so much once again for the support, and also enjoying the streams and enjoying the news we deliver. With that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And thank you very much, Robert, for your support. And up next, we have a $4 donation from another Robert Whitehead, who says, please check your location of Pontoon Bridge. It's closer to Luhansk.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, but I have heard that that bridge was on the Donets River, but we will look into it, and we will see if it needs to be changed, because if it does, I'll make sure to try and switch that out. So I thank you very much for the support. We will look into that, and with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, Honest M puts in a $2 donation and says, in reference to a video you showed earlier, instead of Black Hawk down, it's Maytag down.
Oh no, man, you know, honestly, considering that Maytag is one of the best washing machine brands in the country, someone ought to go and get it. You know, like Maytag repairmen are probably on their way to that helicopter right now. But I do thank you very much for the support. I know which one you're talking about, and yes, it sounds like a Maytag went down. So I thank you very much. I like the joke, and with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $2 donation from Mr. Lunchtime, who says, on me, a Big Mac from McPutin's. Great work, guys.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and I do have to say that we're going to eat a Big Mac, Mr. Lunchtime. Hopefully I don't end up looking like you, but we will have one. So I thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $2 donation from Detroit Micro Sound, who says, check all the patina.
Can you read that again?
Check all the patina.
Check all the patina?
Yes.
I don't know what you're referencing there, but I will try and look at it if I know what you're talking about. But I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question in a way. And with that, we're moving on to the next one.
And let's see. Just looking at a comment from the chat. But anyways, I'm going to ignore that one. Up next, we have a $2 donation from PK Nexus, who says, in Russia, concealment is cover.
Well, that is pretty true. I was thinking about what you were saying there, and yes, I think the Russians think that concealment is cover. The difference in between concealment and cover, everyone, is that concealment hides you from the enemy, but it doesn't hide you from being shot. Cover actually hides you from the enemy and hides you from being shot as well. So a cover would be like sitting in a trench or a ditch or something like that, and concealment would be sitting behind a bush, if you see what I'm saying. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do thank you for the comment there. I do believe that's true for the Russians. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And it is time to recognize a couple of donors without comments. We have a $4 donation from Paul Chow and a $2 donation from CA Lags. Thank you very much for your support of the channel. And as always, very, very much appreciated. And I feel like a broken record saying that, but we actually do truly mean it. And up next, we have a $2 donation from Ben C, who says, supplying Mr. Lunchtime with food must be a hard task.
Oh, you know it's got to be a hard task, man. That's why the Russian logistics are failing. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I like the joke there. That's a pretty good one. Everyone's been having a fun time at Mr. Lunchtime's expense, but I don't think anyone's complaining. So with that, I thank you once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And Enforcer, we do have two super chats that came in after the cutoff. Would you like to address those at this time?
Sure, we can address them.
Okay, we have a $10 donation from William Allen again. William, you're the MVP of the night. That's undisputed. And the message is, I bet you can get him. Starsky has a lot of sway, and he's referring to Zelenskyy.
Well, I thank you very much for the support. Starsky has not actually ever met Zelenskyy, but I believe that if we explain the situation on the phone call to the Ukrainian government or a government official about what we're doing here on stream, we might be able to get him on, because this is one of the highest viewed, well, actually, this is the highest viewed stream on YouTube, as far as I know, about what's going on in the war of Ukraine. And so I think that he would be very happy to come on here and talk to a large audience of viewers that would hear his message. So I thank you very much once again for the support. And I do believe that regardless of however we reach him, through Starsky or through by our own way or whatever, I think that will that may come to fruition, although I'm not making any promises. So I thank you once again for the support, and it is a possibility. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our final super chat of the night, before we move on to our live chat questions, is from Jonathan Toe, who puts in an $8 donation and says, it should be noted that if Ukraine accepts a peace like Finland, it will lose sovereignty, further territorial integrity, and even a degree of its democracy to Russia. Unlikely that it will be accepted.
It will lose sovereignty. It won't. I thank you for the support, but when Finland signed a white peace, they didn't lose sovereignty. That's why Finland still exists today. So I don't think they would be losing sovereignty. Territorial integrity, that territorial integrity has been gone ever since 2014. Donets, Luhansk, and Crimea had been this way for quite some while. So if they signed a peace treaty, it wouldn't be like a new loss of integrity. It would be just continuing the status quo. And even a degree of its democracy to Russia. I don't believe so either. If they sign a white peace, they'll just remain neutral. Of course, Zelenskyy and his government will stay in power, but they won't be able to align themselves with the West, for example, joining a military alliance. So I thank you very much for the support, but I believe we're just going to have to disagree on those statements, because the Winter War and the white peace that was agreed in between the Soviet Union and Finland then didn't really lead to any of those outcomes. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the question, at least when I'm thinking about it in a way. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the live chat questions.
And first up from the live chat questions, we have one from Packrat, who says, how do you guys believe this war will turn once Finland joins NATO?
I don't think this war will be turning in any direction based off of Finland joining NATO. That's kind of like an extenuating circumstance that's related to the war in Ukraine, but it doesn't actually have anything to do with how the ground war is unfolding. So I think if they join NATO, it's not really going to change much, but it will change the geopolitical situation here in Eastern Europe and what the Russians will be facing, because the Finns joining NATO will extend the Russian front line with a NATO country by hundreds of miles, nearly double of what it is now. So I hope that answers the question, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a comment from Detroit Micro Sound, who says, Enforcer, the more you guys are like fine-tuned old-school military radio, comedy included, the more folks are going to tune in. I love your work, and you're great. You're getting great at this.
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and yes, it's getting a little bit more honed and fine-tuned as we go on, because of course I do this so much every night. Some things start to become regular for me to do, and then I start trying to delve into new things and experiment around with what I'm doing. So I thank you so much for the praise. I'm glad that you are enjoying this, and yes, we are starting to become a little bit more like military commentators in a way you could say, but I don't want to say I am military. I have had no military experience. Just everyone keep that in mind, but I do thank you very much for the praise once again. And with that, we're going to move on to two more questions from the live chat, and then we're going to wrap up tonight's stream. And so with that, on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Good Success, who says, Enforcer, can the Turkish drone that drops bombs unnoticed in Donbas region be used in Mariupol?
You're talking about the Bayraktar drone, and to answer that question, the Bayraktar drone may be able to fly to Mariupol, but it cannot carry a large amount of weight. So the amount of supplies it would actually be able to carry would be low. Of course, it'd have to fly a little bit low to the Azovstal to drop its cargo. Then it'll most likely be visually sighted by ground forces and then shot down. So unless if they're able to drop the supplies from incredibly high up at a high altitude and just have them land straight into the Azovstal without landing into a Russian-controlled area of the plant, it would be pretty tough to actually achieve a resupply using a Bayraktar drone. But I do thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting one, but that's my assessment right now. And of course, it could be wrong. You know, I'm always willing to go into everything saying I could be wrong. That's just my assessment of the situation. And with that, I thank you so much for the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next, we have one from pghting who says, Enforcer, how far is it from the front line to Belgorod should the Ukrainians invade Russia?
Oh, the front line to Belgorod, I believe, is around 30 miles right now, but let's check. Down the E105, it's 25 miles right now, so it's not far away at all. In fact, the Russians had to cover more ground from Chernobyl to Kyiv. It was like 50 miles there, and the Ukrainians will only have to cover around 25 miles to get to Belgrade, so only half the distance. To answer that question, I don't think the Ukrainians should push into Russia. That seems like a bad idea, and it seems like it would escalate this war into areas that the Ukrainians would not wish for it to go. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you so much for it. It is an interesting question, but I just don't believe that's something the Ukrainians would want to pursue because of the implications of it. So with that, I see that we have one more super chat, Matthew, from William Allen. So could we recognize that one real quick before we round out tonight's stream?
Yeah, and William Allen puts in another $10 donation, and he says the Finns destroyed the Russians with the P-36.
Well, I thank you very much for the support once again, William Allen, and I believe you may be talking about the P-36 aircraft. I'm not exactly sure. Finnish P-36. Let me make sure. That's right. Yeah, it looks like a P-36 Hawk. And it looks like there were some Finnish. Yes, we can see a Finnish P-36 right there. So yes, I do thank you very much for the support, and it does look like they did use the P-36, which was an American-made and sold aircraft to the Finns, which was a very interesting story because then the Finnish actually aligned themselves with the Axis powers practically during all of World War II, and actually had some German units inside of their country during the Continuation War, which started, I believe, in 1942 and went on until like 1944 and 1945. So I thank you once again for the support, and yes, that is true. So I hope that does address the comment, and with that, that is the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching.
And Enforcer, would you mind taking one more question, because I promised a viewer that I would ask a question, and if you don't mind.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so the final live chat question of the night goes to Shubin, who says, do you think further sanctions will have any impact on Russia's actions? I think so far they've helped out, but do you think more can be done? You're already doing your part, and thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the support and enjoying what we do. And to answer that question, more sanctions, of course, will damage the Russian economy further, which, of course, will hurt their pocketbooks, which will make them reconsider their decisions. We haven't seen them reconsider their decisions enough to end the war yet, but we have seen that the crippling economic destruction of their nation is starting to weigh heavily on the minds of the Russians, considering that they're now lacking basic goods. So I think that is something, if a new round of sanctions was to come through that was incredibly strong, it may actually change some of the thoughts and ideas in the Russian government. But then again, would it end the war? And the answer to that question is a little shaky because it hasn't ended it yet. So I thank you very much for the question. I hope that does answer it. And I thank you so much for enjoying these streams. I hope that you're still around to hear that answer. And so, with that, that is the end of tonight's stream. I thank you all so much for watching once again. If you are a new viewer to the stream, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We do run these streams every single day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. Thank you all once again, and I will see you all tomorrow on the Day 79 news, just one day away from being Day 80 of the news of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all so much once again, and I will see you all tomorrow. Take care.